Hey sailors, welcome to the crew. I'm Sailor Janda, and this is Sea Lord Janda's All the World's Fighting Ships 1930 for the Great Britain campaign. So, as you can see when this save was taken, we had just gone to war with the United States, and as a result, the treaty system that prevailed for pretty much the last, 7 to 8 years had just broken down, so this should be interesting actually, because it's a look at what the AI nations have done in the course of essentially almost a decade of living under a treaty system, which, among other things, limited battleships to a maximum of 25,000 tons and 13-inch guns, well, all capital ships, so also battle cruisers and carriers, and limited overall fleet tonnages as well. So fleets in general will be smaller than they would have otherwise been. Quite considerably so, potentially. So, under the treaty, effectively, well, now I forget what the actual treaty tonnages were, but how we ended up immediately after the treaty is Spain has the smallest fleet at 325,000 tons total. Then Russia, 400,000. I think perhaps they never quite fully rebuilt under the treaty, or perhaps they got a very small tonnage when the treaty started because of how weak their fleet was. I don't remember which. Austria-Hungary, 444,000 tons. Italy, 533,000. Japan, 607,000. France, 614,000. Germany, 776,000. And then us, Great Britain, 858,000. The USA, 873,000. The USA does have the biggest budget, but wasn't able to fully use it because of the treaty for a long while. So we will start with not battleships. We will start with destroyers, and then we will get around, work our way up as usual. So Spain currently has 325,000 tons of ships, 29 destroyers amounting to 36,000 tons, which is really not a whole lot. It appears they have the oldest are the Sweizes from 1914, which are 1,100 tons, two 5-inch guns, 32 knots, four torpedo tubes, which I'm guessing is probably two twin, although it's hard to tell. Then they have a couple of smaller Alcalo Gallianos, which are two 4-inch guns and only make 30 knots because they're only 800 tons. And then Las Zagas, which are 33 knots, but two 4-inch with the four torpedo tubes. And then more recently, post treaty, Almirante Ferrandi's, two 4-inch guns, 32 knots, six torpedo tubes, with depth charges and all that. That's probably two triples, although it could be three twins. Looks like two triples to me, I think. Almirante Antequeras, 1,400 tonners with two 5-inch guns, 33 knots, two triple torpedo tubes, and then most recently, the T-54 1,200 tonners with two 4-inch guns, two quad torpedo tubes, and 32 knot speeds. So overall, nothing too exciting or exceptional there, and I'm pretty sure they're all significantly undergunned compared to most of my destroyers. That would be a definite yes. And under torpedoed as well compared to all my most modern designs. Spain has not built anything exceptional in the destroyer field. Probably unsurprisingly, as they do remain the most backward nation by a good way. So, Russia actually, 401,000 tons. They have 37 destroyers amounting to 65,000 tons, although they've just laid 14 more down, so their actual tonnage is probably only about 50,000 tons right now. They have one old 600 tonner for some reason with two 3-inch guns, two twin torpedo. No, I think that might actually be four single torpedo tubes. And 30 knot top speed. They've got a couple of 900 tonners with four 4-inch guns, three torpedo tubes, and a 31 knot speed. This one off 900 tonner with two 5-inch guns and only two torpedo tubes, but a 32 knot speed. Then they have various 1,100 tonners with 30 to 31 knots mainly, two 5-inch or 4-inch guns, and Mostly looks like 2 triple torpedo tubes, or possibly, I don't know, 6 total. But a couple of these with 9 total, which this looks like 2 5-inch guns, 3 triple torpedo tubes. A lot of the Met keys were the biggest class here. Love keys, which look pretty much identical, but I guess are faster. Ispolnetelnis have 2 5-inch guns, 9 torpedo tubes, 31 knots speed, so they're pretty much the same torpedo boat layout. And then more recently, they've built the 1,300-ton Bernies, which have 3 4-inch guns, 33 knots, 6 torpedo tubes total. It's probably 2 triples, which, you know, they're fast. They have not spectacular armament and torpedo capacity. I think my destroyers are almost uniformly slow. Well, my new ones aren't slower. These are pretty much better. I mean, we'll get to them, but these are pretty much better than anything the Russians have, I think. So I'm not overly impressed with the AI destroyers I've seen so far. Of course, these are from the backwards countries mostly. Then they have just laid down a bunch of 1,500, 1,700, and 2,000 tonners post-treaty, which I have not yet. Now, Austria-Hungary has 52 destroyers amounting to 68,000 tons. None of them buildings, definitely a bigger force than Russia. They have a couple of 700 tonners with 4 4-inch guns, 3 torpedo tubes, 29 knots. Some 800 tonners that are pretty much the same, but 31 knots. A couple of Tigers, which are similar again, but 4 torpedo tubes and 32 knots. Then with the Leopards, they went down to 2 4-inch guns, 4 torpedo tubes, and 31 knots. I'm not really sure where they lost the speed and guns there. Perhaps on longer range or less cramped quarters or something. Or just on more mines and depth charge throwers and such, which there are depth charge throwers, so that's part of the difference. Then the Ulan class, 2 5-inch guns, 3 triple tubes, 32 knots. The Pythons, 2 5-inch guns, 2 triple tubes, 34 knots. Very fast, not that heavily armed at all for 1,400 tonners, though, to be honest. The Lesinas, well, the Duklas look similar to the Pythons, but with quad tubes, probably. The Lesinas have 2 5-inch guns and triple tubes, 33 knots. The Cruzolas are 34 knots with 3 5-inch guns and probably quad tubes. And then that's pretty much their latest design, because they basically repeated that with the Moldau class. So again, they're not terrible, but they do feel a little underarmed compared to some of my modern destroyers. Yeah. Then it would be Italy next. They have 60 destroyers amounting to 72,000 tons, which is just marginally larger force than the Austrians and probably less average tonnage per ship. They've got a bunch of 800, 900 tonners still sitting around. The 900 tonners have 4 4-inch guns, 3 torpedo tubes, 31 knots. The 800 tonners have 2 4-inch guns, 4 torpedo tubes, 31 knots. I don't think it's probably worth losing 2 guns for 1 torpedo tube, but maybe. Then they've got a bunch of 1,100 tonners, which have the guns and 4 4-inch guns and 4 torpedo tubes and make 31 knots. So apparently all it took was for the design to be bigger. And then they have the 1,200-ton Osleros, which are actually worse again, with 2 4-inch guns and a 30-knot top speed. And, I mean, again, they've gained depth charge throwers and such. It seems like that makes the AI a lot less efficient with the weight, maybe? I don't know. Because it seems like a downgrade to me overall. It's better against anti-submarine duties, but not much else. Then the Stralas, which have 3 4-inch guns, 6 torpedo tubes, so they've got triples now, and make 32 knots. Followed by the Pelare Bronzettis, which have 3 5-inch guns and 3 triple torpedo tubes, plus 32 knot speeds. They actually reverted from those back down to the 1,200-ton Antonio Mostos, which have 3 5-inch guns, 2 triple tubes, and a 32-knot speed. So, but not before they built a few 33-knotters with the 5-inch guns and triple tubes. And the most recently, they've gone back to 1400 tonners with 3 5-inch guns, probably 2 quad tubes, and 32 knot speeds. But again, not the most spectacular armament on average. I mean, it's not a terrible force. There's not that much variance in destroyers, but not that spectacular. So that was Italy, right? So then we have Japan. They have 58 destroyers amounting to 71,000 tons, which is a little bit less than Italy. They've got a bunch of 700 tonners still in service, which is part of that. 700 tons, 31 knots, 3 4-inch guns, and just 2 torpedo tubes, which is perilously few, yeah. A couple of them have 4 4-inch guns and 3 torpedo tubes, which is better, but still not great. They've got a couple, just 2 900 tonners, which are similar but a little bit faster. And then they built several classes of 1100 tonners, which are 2 4-inch guns, 2 twin torpedo tubes, and 33 knots. They built a couple that are 32 knots but have 5-inch guns instead. But otherwise, that was basically the formula for a good while in the mid-teens. Then Amagiris, which are 1400 tons and have an extra knot of speed, but otherwise are pretty similar. They've got depth charge throwers now, but the old ones did too, so I really don't know what they gained from going up to 1400 tons, maybe range. But they only built a few of those and then went back down to 1200 tons and lost 2 knots of speed in the process, which is not great. But then went back up to 1500 tons and added an extra gun and probably quad torpedo tubes with 32 knots. So 3 4-inch, 8 torpedo tubes, and 32 knots. And they pretty much repeated that capability with a series of 1500, 1400, and more recently 1300 ton ships, which probably means they're iterating every time they get the tech to make a slightly smaller ship, which is actually pretty good AI gameplay because they're not changing the design, they're just optimizing over and over again, which is not something I, as the player, bother to do much, so that's a place they might even actually have an advantage over me. Except I still don't think the ships are that great, they're just not that spectacularly armed, but yeah. Now they're building a couple 1700 tonners. France has 57 destroyers amounting to 62,000 tons, which is not a whole heck of a lot of tonnage, actually. You'll notice it's distinctly less than Japan or Italy or even Austria-Hungary. So not a fantastic destroyer force for the French at the moment. They've got a couple of 900 tonners with 3 4-inch guns and just 2 torpedo tubes, a bunch of 800 tonners with 2, well, these have 4 4-inch, 3 torpedo tubes and make 31 knots. But then they have some with 2 4-inch, 4 torpedo tubes, which I've seen you make that trade-off. I don't think it's a great one. They then upgraded to 1100 tonners, which are a knot faster, and otherwise not any better really as far as I can tell. It seems like a lot of tonnage to get a knot of speed, honestly. Then they switched to 1500 tonners, first with 2 5-inch guns, 3 triple tubes, but only 30 knots, then to 2 4-inch guns, 2 triple tubes, but make 32 knots, which kind of not well armed, though. And finally, they got 1500 tonners that had 2 5-inch guns, 3 triple tubes, and 32 knots at some point. Stuck with those briefly. Lately, they've built some 1300 tonners with 2 6-inch guns, 2 triple tubes, 33 knots. Which it's a heavy couple of guns, but still not a lot of overall gun power or torpedo power. So, yeah, I'm not that convinced by the modern AI destroyer design overall so far. Now, that just leaves the big three, which are Germany, the USA, and myself pretty clearly at this point. Germany has 71 destroyers amounting to 145,000 tons, which makes them pretty clearly the largest destroyer power by tonnage at the moment. Although the USA has more hulls, and so do I, actually. But even considering that they have 16 building, it's a lot of tonnage for Germany. So let's see. Oh, wow. Yeah. Wow, wow, wow. Okay, fair play to Germany. They have 0 destroyers below 1,400 tons in service in their entire fleet. Also, 0 destroyers built before 1920, and it's only two 1,400 tonners. All the others are 1,500 tons plus. And they have a lot of over 1,500 tonners. So that's quite impressive. Alright, so they have some 1,500 tonners from 1920 proper, which have 3 5-inch guns, 3 triple torpedo tubes, and 31 knot top speeds. They built a couple of 1,400 tonners right after, which have 4-inch guns and 2 triples, but make 32 knots. But then they went back to 1,500 tonners with the same armament and 31 knots, so I'm not sure why. Well, just for depth charge throwers and mines, I guess. But then they went back to the 3 5-inch guns, 3 triple tubes, 32 knots now on the 1,500 ton design. Stuck with that for a large class or two, well, just one. The S-54 class, but that's like 10 or 15 destroyers. Then they dropped a couple torpedo tubes to get mines and depth charge thrower, well, just to get mines on by the look of it, which I don't know if it's really worth. Well, I've lost several ships to mines, spoilers in the latest war, so perhaps it is worth it, but hard to judge for sure. In any case, I'm pretty sure that's what they lost the torpedo tubes to. And then they went back down to 3 4-inch guns as well. And probably in order to get up to 33 knots. I don't know that that's worth it. Then they went back to 3 5-inch guns. Then they started building these 1,700 tonners, which have 4 5-inch guns, 2 quad tubes, and 34 knot top speeds. Then the Luxe class, 2,000 tons, 35 knots, 8 5-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, and 2 quad tubes, and these are really, really nasty. These would actually chew up any destroyer I have for sure. Interestingly, they didn't stick with them. They then went for the slightly more budget 1,900 ton Z5s, which have 8 4-inch guns in, I guess it must be twin turrets, although they don't entirely look like them on this diagram. And 2 quad torpedo tubes, 35 knot speeds. And then they went back down to 1,700 tonners, which have 4 5-inch guns, 2 quad tubes, 33 knot speeds, although some of them claim 35 down here. That's a new class, so I guess it's faster. But they have a lot of very large destroyers, including the first I've seen that have twin turret 8-gun layouts, which are quite nice. So well done, Germany. That's easily the best force I've seen so far, including probably surpassing my own, which has 80 destroyers amounting to 98,000 tons. Of those, probably 30 to 40 are the 1,000-ton Fame class from the early teens. These are 1,000 tons, 32 knot speeds, 4 4-inch and 4 3-inch dual-purpose guns, 2 triple torpedo tubes, I think, unless it's 3 twin. It might actually be 3 twin. Don't remember anymore. A few mines. They really don't hold up that badly. They actually still have as much gun and torpedo power and speed as most of the modern AI destroyers, which is helped out by the fact that I refitted all of them in 28 to make them a lot more combat capable for the modern era, improved director and all. They're still not a match for the newest destroyers around, like those big German ones, but honestly, the newest destroyers built by anything but Germany, I would say they're pretty much comparable to. Then more recently, we have the Goldfinch class from 1919. There's only about 15 to maybe 20 of these. These are 1,400 tonners, 30 knots only. They have 3 5-inch guns, 2 4-inch, and 12 torpedo tubes in the form, I think, of 3 quad tubes, unless it's 4 triples, but I don't entirely remember. Anyway, these are a bit of an awkward compromise. They definitely lose some speed. Their gun power is still good. Their torpedo armament exceeds anything I've seen on any AI design, to be fair. But they do lose some speed for sure. They're a bit of an awkward middle child, you might say. And then most recently we have the Kale class, which are also 1,400 tons, but benefit considerably from the advance of really only 4 years of time, but they did benefit considerably as they gain 3 knots of speed. same armament, which is solid compared to what the AI does, but not spectacular, especially when the Germans now have twin turret destroyers. Although very good torpedo armament. But the high speed is a big upgrade over the Goldfinch class. I would say the Kales are a match for everything. I would say almost any of my destroyers are a match for anything we saw, except the latest things out of Germany. Those latest things out of Germany are scary. And so then finally we reach the USA, which has 96 destroyers amounting to 128,000 tons. That's a bit less tonnage than Germany, but it's a lot of destroyer tonnage, actually. Now, they do still have some older ships in service, these 900 tonners with 4 4-inch guns, 3 torpedo tubes, 31 knot speeds, 700 tonners with pretty much the same capabilities, actually, to be fair. And then 800 tonners with 2 4-inch guns, 4 torpedo tubes, and mines added on, which are objectively, they're also slower at 29 knots, so these are just significantly worse, honestly. Then some 1100 ton Stuarts, which are same armament as the hulls, but even more mines, and 3 knots faster, which at least makes them viable, but just kind of underarmed. Built one more hull as well. Then they started building 1100 ton Flusers, which had 2 5-inch instead of 4-inch guns. And then went over to Warringtons, which had 3 4-inch guns instead of 2 5-inch, but were otherwise the same. Then back to then Beals, which also had 3 4-inch, and I don't even know why they're a different class. Well, they're not slower for some reason, actually. Were they the first depth charge throwers? Nope, I don't know why they're slower. Then they switched over to 1500 tonners, which had 3 5-inch guns, 8 torpedo tubes, and 32 knot speeds. And they built quite a few of these Benhams. Then they switched to McDougalls, which have no mines, but the 3rd triple torpedo tube instead, or yeah, I don't know if these have 2 quads or what, but 3 triples on these. 9 total. I don't know if the extra tube, 1 extra tube, actually was worth losing all the mines. A couple extra depth charge throwers too. And it might be a better layout for the torpedo tubes, so probably pretty good. They finally got them up to 33 knots with the Parker class, and then more recently they abruptly dropped back to 3 4-inch guns and 6 torpedo tubes, 33 knots with the 1100 ton Allens. Before they did 6 4-inch guns and 8 total torpedo tubes on the Caldwells, so I guess that's 3 twin turrets. That's the partial step forward. 34 knot speeds as well, so those are quite nice. Yes, they have finally hit their stride here. They then build, then they build 1600 ton Davises, which are 34 knots, but still only the 3 5-inch guns, 8 torpedo tubes. Then they really hit their stride with the Connors, which are 2,000 tons, 35 knots, 8 5-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, and 8 torpedo tubes. And then they went back to the Davis design, then back to the Connors, and most recently they're building Hazelwoods, which have 8 4-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 35 knot speeds, 8 torpedo tubes. So they're starting down the Germany path, but they only have about, I don't know, 12 or so of these twin turret destroyers so far. I'm sure they're building more, although the dents are not that big. But I don't know, they're probably second after Germany overall at this point, and I'm third, but it's hard to say. The US is not as far down the conversion route as Germany is, for sure. And so now let's take a look at the light cruisers. Now, the treaty did cause the AI to start building more cruisers again, especially heavy cruisers because of the strict limit on capital ships, but some light cruisers as well. Except for Spain, which has none. No light cruisers for Spain. Overall, I still have the most tonnage of light cruisers, and, well, with building ships, it's hard to judge exactly. It's close with the USA. Everybody else is far behind myself in the USA on light cruisers. And I do just have the most general cruiser tonnage still. But let's take a look nation by nation. So Spain, as I say, it has 0 light cruisers whatsoever. Russia. Russia has 8 light cruisers amounting to 56,000 tons, which doesn't make for a very heavy average now. They have one surviving Voivoda from the war era. These are 5,400 tons, 29 knots, 8 5-inch guns, 2-inch belt. Doesn't have the armament of a cruiser. Not a modern layout either. Well, no, not great even for the time. It's only got 2 centerline guns, so yeah. Pretty bad. They then built 2 Greedens, which with 5,100 tons, 30 knots, 5 6-inch guns, all centerline. No. 3 centerline and 2 on the sides. 30 knot speed, 1.5-inch belt. Look, these are very small cruisers. Yes, they have 6-inch guns. They effectively have a broadside, really, of 4 6-inch guns. They make 30 knots, 1.5-inch belt. They're pretty fast. They're not well armored, and honestly, they're not well armed. Yes, they're mostly all centerline, but they're not that good. I would rate my own Conquest class to beat these relatively comfortably. Then they have 1, 2, 3, 5 Pomyat Mercurias, which are 1,000 tons heavier. For that, they gain a knot of speed. They have 6 6-inch guns, which are in 3 twin centerline turrets, 8 3-inch and a 2-inch belt. You know, these are quite a lot better. Also 8 3-inch dual purpose. And 8 torpedo tubes above water, so it's probably, it might be 4 twin by the look of it actually, but still. 8 torpedo tubes above water. These are quite a lot better. They're faster. They're significantly better, like 50% heavier broadside. A little better armored. And they gain all those torpedo tubes, which the Voivoda didn't, or Greedens did not have, right? No, they had 4 actually, to be fair, but this is doubled, so. These, for the extra 1,000 tons, have a knot of speed, slightly better armor, and at least 50% better broadside, plus 100% more torpedo power. So, much better, the Pomyat Mercurius. Still not spectacular, but much better. And for their displacement budget, quite nice, I think. And now they're building 2 Zelazinyakovs, which are 5,300 tons, so I wouldn't hold out too much hope for those. Now, Austria-Hungary has 5 light cruisers amounting to 32,000 tons. This would be 2 Szigetvars of 5,100 tons, 28 knots, 10 5-inch guns, 2.5-inch belt. Not that fast for modern light cruisers, not terrible. Very weakly armed, especially with only 2 centerline guns. So this is a very old style. They've, to be fair, still got a total broadside of 6 5-inch guns, but at this stage that's becoming a destroyer broadside. It's not great. Their belt is fine, their speed is mediocre, they're not very good anymore. They were never very good, but now they're becoming quite obsolete. And then 3 Jupiters, which are a lot better. These are 7,400 tonners, 31 knots, 9 6-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, 8 4-inch and a 2-inch belt. I mean, these are fast, reasonable armor, outstanding armament. Are these brand new? No, they're not even. They're 7 years old. Damn. Fair play to Austria. I think they must be one of the first powers to build this kind of heavy light cruiser with proper twin and triple turrets, centerline all the way down, and I mean, this would stand up great. This is equal to the cruisers I'm building as 1930 Dons, so well done, Austria. Of course, they only have 3 of them, but not bad at all. So then it is Italy. Italy has 6 light cruisers, which do not amount to 69,000 tons, probably half of that or something, yeah. They have a Gordot, which is a very old, 20-year-old ship, 4,000 tons, 29 knots, 4 6-inch guns, which are 2 twin turrets, 6 4-inch, and a 1.5-inch belt. Look, the armament was never that great. The speed is now not that great. The armor is not that great. It was better when built, but still not that great because of the armament. At this point, it's pretty obsolete. Honestly, it's still getting quite a bit out of a 4,000-ton displacement, but I just wouldn't really recommend building a 4,000-ton cruiser. And in the era where there's 2,000-ton destroyers with 8 5-inch guns, it's looking mighty vulnerable. Then two Irid class, which are 5,200 tons, 29 knots, five 5-inch guns, which are not even all centerline, only three of them centerline, and a 1.5-inch belt. This is straight up garbage. It has a broadside of four 5-inch guns, which wasn't even better than destroyers when she was built, let alone now. Maybe it was marginally better than destroyers when she was built, but not by much. Two destroyers probably would have outgunned her when she was built. And her speed is not that great, her armor is not that great. These are sitting ducks, really. Then one Puglia, which is 5,600 tons, 31 knots, six 5-inch guns, and it looks like four of them are centerline at least, which is an improvement. 1.5-inch belt. I mean, it's pretty typical for the era. I really don't love the era as far as light cruiser design goes. I built some reluctantly for myself, and I've never liked them, and I'm replacing them as quickly as possible. But okay. Oh, wait, they're 5-inch guns. I thought they were 6-inch. Okay, it's just garbage then. Never mind. I was about to say it's kind of okay for the era, or I was in the process, but I thought they were 6-inch guns. Those being 5-inch guns, she has a broadside of five 5-inch guns, which again means she's outgunned by a good modern destroyer or two, and is slower than them, and honestly, the 1.5 inch of armor's not gonna change that much. So, what the hell does she even exist for? Garbage. And then the Etrurios, two of them, 5,400 tons, 30 knots, five 5-inch guns, of which it appears only three are centerline and a 1-inch belt. So again, this is a really expensive destroyer. And not that good of a destroyer, because there's destroyers with scarcely over a third this displacement that have a heavier broadside in both guns and torpedoes, and are faster. So, what the hell is this ship's purpose for existing? It doesn't even have armor, really. 1-inch belt is effectively negligible. Now they're building five 7,700-ton Quartos. Those might change the tune of their cruiser fleet a little, but it's pretty damn bad right now, honestly. So that'll bring us over to Japan. They have 6 light cruisers amounting to 33,000 tons, which means an awfully small average. And they are all... No, 5 of them are the Yayamas, which are 5,700 tons, 28 knots, 6 5-inch guns, of which 4 are centerline and a 2-inch belt. Well, I said it about the similar Italian ships, and I'll say it about these. They're terrible. 5 5-inch gun broadside, 28 knot speed, both pretty much inadequate at this stage. I mean, saying that, I'm going to have to criticize a bunch of my own cruisers that also only make about 27, 28 knots, but realistically, the most modern cruisers are faster than that. And, well, it's easier and more justified to say, okay, if you're going to have only 5-inch guns, you need to make like 35 knots or something so that you can run away from anything. This cannot run away from plenty of much larger cruisers, and is pretty much just going to get destroyed. Simple as, really. And then they have one Yahagi, which is 5,100 tons, 29 knots, 4 6-inch guns, which are at least all centerlined, and a 2.5-inch belt. Honestly, I'd rather have this than a Yayama any day. It's still not that good. It's only 4 6-inch guns. It's not that outstandingly fast. Well, it's not that bad. As I said, I would rather have this than a Yayama any day. It's effectively more firepower than one. It's not that much firepower, though. And it's not that fast. It's not that terrible, but it's not that fast. Armor's alright, so I'm not too down on the Yahagi. Especially on a bit of a displacement budget there. Barely 5,100 tons, so that's pretty good, actually. So then, France. France has 8 light cruisers amounting to, well, not quite 63,000 tons in practice, but it does sound like a heavier average, and it is. Now, they do have one Davut from 1917. This is 4,900 tons, 27 knots, 10 5-inch guns, of which only 2 are centerline and a 3-inch belt. Armor's pretty good. Speed is not great now. Average for the time. Still not, like, hopelessly bad, but below average now, we'll admit. Armament is going to be pretty bad. Practically speaking, it's 6-gun broadside. So, not any better than the modern centerline layouts, really. And they're 5-inch guns, so it's not that great. You can't really run away from anything on a 27 knot speed. I mean, basically, you gotta put it that way. If you're gonna use only 27 knots, or 28 or 29 even on a modern light cruiser by 1930, it's got to have the firepower to fight things. And this does not. So, it needs to be able to do 32 knots or something. Then 2 Souchets, which are 4,700 tons, 28 knots. 5 6-inch guns, of which 3 are centerline and a 2-inch belt. Well, it's the pretty typical, like, interwar design. It's not good. It's got a 4 6-inch gun broadside. It's not that fast. It's not that well armored. It's fine. The armor's fine for a light cruiser. The speed is fine, but not outstanding. And the armament is just below par. I really don't like these interwar designs. I've said that a couple times already, but I mean, I really made sure to slam at least 6 guns into mine, even though it doesn't really want you to do that. And fortunately, the French did the same with their follow-up design, the Surkoff class, which is 7,600 tons, 31 knots, 7 6-inch guns, of which it appears 5 centerline and 2 side, which why at that point, but 4-inch belts. So you know what? These are keepers for the fact that they're stuck to the interwar design without twin turrets. They're fast. They actually have a 6-inch gun broadside, plus 4 4-inch, plus 12 above water torpedo tubes, 4 triples it looks like. Here, so 6 to a side, and a very nice 4-inch belt. So the Surkoffs are actually quite nice for their design era. They're pretty much peak. I would say they're about as good as I've seen anywhere of this design, including probably better than my own conquests. Yeah. And then they built the Guichen, which is 7,500 tons, 32 knots, 7 6-inch, 4 4-inch, 3-inch belt, 12 torpedo tubes, and 4 triples. This is like, this is like the same concept, but 2 years of technological improvements later, they managed to get an extra knot of speed while being 100 tons lighter, which just makes the design even more perfect, really, unless they sacrificed something else like range or something in the background, but could just be a good couple of years of tech breakthroughs. And yeah, at a knot faster and 100 tons lighter, I can only say it's even better than Surkoff, so well done. Now they're building a couple of smaller 5,700 tonners. We'll see about those. So that brings us to the big 3. Germany has 11 light cruisers amounting to 71,000 tons, which is the 3rd largest force in the world. In fairness, although there's a big 3 overall, sort of, it's kind of a big 2, but Germany's only fractionally behind. They're closer to Britain and the USA than they are to France, so I'll call them part of the big 3. At least on current tonnage. But they are not part of the big 3 in terms of light cruisers. They are way the hell behind both Britain and the USA. At 11, amounting to 71,000 tons. That would be 1 Undine, 5,200 tons, 27 knots, 5 6-inch guns, 2 3-inch, 3-inch belt. Well, the 5 6-inch are actually all centerlined, and the 3-inch belt is quite nice, so I mean, it's still a little underarmed compared to what I'd love, but it's better than almost all those AI designs that had 5-inch guns or only 4 6-inch guns. Even the ones that had a knot or 2 of speed, I would rather have this for the extra gun and armor. And the speed's pretty nice. The speed is not nice, like in the sense that 27 is pretty much the minimum these days. Faster would be better, 30 plus would be better. But it's acceptable to me in the sense that she's a pretty old cruiser. Well, actually, she's not, to be fair. She's only 10 years old, but it's not bad. For squeezing it all into 5,200 tons, it's really not bad. I'm not too unhappy with those. Then they have two Hamburgs, which are 6,400 tons, 31 knots, 7 6-inch guns, 4 3-inch and a 1.5-inch belt. I'm trying to count 1, 2, 3. Okay, so where they've gone wrong is they only have 3 centerline guns here. Perhaps a displacement concession or something, but well, they've still got a 5 6-inch gun broadside, which is not too bad. Their armor is not great. Their speed is pretty good. Honestly, it's still better than the vast majority of designs from the other AIs I've seen with a 5 6-inch gun broadside and 31 knot speed. But it's not that I feel like there's wasted potential by having 2 pairs of wing turrets here. I would rather have just gotten it up to a 6-inch gun broadside. And I feel like 4 centerline turrets is not impossible to have squeezed in. Plus, that little loss of belt armor is not great. And then they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Leipzigs, and oh, these are very nice though. Wow, these are. I had not noticed the AI had started building this kind of thing, honestly. The good thing I finally am now. These are 7,900 tons, 32 knots, 8 6-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 8 4-inch, and a 1.5-inch belt. Speed, outstanding. Armament, outstanding. Armor, meh. But, you know, not that bad, considering she's a light cruiser. Looks like 4 twin torpedo tubes. I could probably try to stick triples or quadruples on there. But this is a very, very nice cruiser design. Just all around. I quite like it. For something coming from the AI, it's really quite good. I'm not going to nitpick too hard. And, of course, they've then ruined it with 3 Bremen-class ships, which are 4,700 tons, 31 knots. They take the wondrous twin turrets on cruisers tech and ruin it by putting 4 twin 5-inch turrets on with a 1-inch belt. It's slower than the Leipzigs even, despite being lighter armed, lighter armored. Its armament goes from outstanding to pretty damn weak, really, because Germany themselves. This is the extra hilarious thing, isn't it? 1-inch belt as well, which barely makes a difference. Germany literally has half a dozen, or even like a dozen or something, 2,000-ton destroyers, which have equal gun firepower than this, more torpedo tubes than this, are about 4 knots faster than this, and the only area they're lacking is maybe like mines, AA guns, and technically that inch of armor belt, but like, that inch of armor belt's not going to make any damned difference. And the speed and agility and size will make more difference against planes than the AA guns will, so why the hell does this exist? Why does it exist? Germany can build a ship that does everything this does for less than half the displacement, and I've seen it. It's right bloody here. Right here. Okay, that's the 8 4-inch version. Here, 8 5-inch. Like, why, Germany, why? Oh well. The Leipzigs are still, like, the best AI cruisers I've seen, I think. Well, the Austrian couple of Jupiters were also very, very nice, to be fair, but I think I like the Leipzigs even better. Well, 8 6, 8 4, 32, 1.5. 9 6, 8 4, 31, 2. Yeah, actually. The only edge the Germans have is the extra knot of speed. I think the Austrians, well, they need 2 less torpedo tubes also. Bit of a toss-up. I'd probably take the Austrian design, actually, but then again, when I built the ship, it looked closer to the German design, so a bit of a toss-up. Now, I have 26 light cruisers. I'm definitely one of the big 2 here, with another 12 building, which is a total of 285,000 tons. My big rival, the USA, has 28 in service, with 7 building, amounting to 222,000 tons. Our ships in service for light cruisers amount to 2 types. Of the 26, we have 12 of the Conquest class fleet cruisers, which are the ones intended for actual combat. These are 7,900 tons, 28 knots, 6 6-inch guns, which, good grief, it's hard to make out, but I believe I stuffed them all into the center line at the cost of some weird firing arcs for some of them, if we're being honest. 6 4-inch, 3-inch belt, 2-inch deck, 4 above water torpedo tubes, I believe 2 twin. So this is, of course, the interwar type design rather than the twin turrets type design, which means the new German Leipzigs and the like are just definitely better. Other than that, well, against all the AI interwar designs, I would say it is better. It's got the actual 6-inch gun broadside. It's got some torpedo tubes, similar torpedo tubes to what most of those AI ships had, I think. Better armor than most all of them, especially deck. And decent, respectable speed. I would say these are almost world beaters, except for those very few, like 5 German and 3 Austro-Hungarian twin turret cruisers we saw through the whole list. So they're very rare, but they're starting to exist, which is why I'm replacing the Conquests. But these were excellent for most of the 20s. And then we have 14 of the Minerva class, which are our colonial cruisers intended to fulfill our foreign stations requirement. These are 6,900 tons, 27 knots, 6-inch guns in single turrets, also all stuffed into the center line, 8 4-inch, 2-inch belt, 1.5-inch deck. They actually have pretty much the same firepower gun-wise as the Conquests, so they're not helpless by any means. They don't have the deck torpedo tubes. They have less armor by 1 inch of belt and 1/2 inch of deck, and they have a knot less of speed. In exchange for which, they have long range and colonial service fittings, and I still save 1,000 tons on them. So, they'll do. Honestly, they can defend themselves against most AI cruisers pretty well still, and they fulfill our foreign stations requirement in about the most efficient manner possible, at least that doesn't come across like super gamey to me. Now, the USA... Oh, and before we go on any further, I should also talk about our newest class, the 12 Bristol class cruisers, which are currently under construction and slated to be finished, the first of them within 4 months of this save, and the first, 6 within the next 6 months, and then the remainder 10 months, so all within the year of 1930. These are the replacements for the Conquests. They are 7,800 tons, 30 knots, 8 6-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 8 4-inch, 8 above water torpedo tubes in, I think, 2 quad mounts, 3-inch belt, 1.5-inch deck. Overall, these are pretty much equal to the German Leipzigs, I would say. They are a bit slower, but also quite a bit more heavily armored. I probably take the armor over the 2 knots of speed, but you can go either way. Same number of torpedo tubes. Mine are in 2 quad instead of 4 twin. I don't know which of those decisions is objectively better, to be honest, but overall, I would say these Bristols are roughly equal to the German Leipzigs or the Austro-Hungarian, what are they called? Jupiters. And these are pretty much the latest and greatest in light cruisers around the world. These should hold up at least a decade or two. Probably 2, really. No problem. I mean, there'll be slightly nicer light cruisers by the end of the decade, but not by such a radical difference as these represent from any of the preceding light cruisers, 9, even 12 16-inch, 6-inch guns, that is, will come along, but that won't leave these completely in the dust by any means. So now let's take a look at the good old USA, which has 28 light cruisers in service and 7 building. They're more of a mixed bag than I am, with some, I can see some very good cruisers already, and I can see some not so good cruisers. The oldest, 20 years old, is Des Moines, which is 4,000 tons, 28 knots, 4 6-inch guns and 2 twin turrets, 6 4-inch, 1.5-inch belt. To be fair, still compares well against a lot of other interwar cruisers with all centerline armaments. This is technically an all centerline armament, in point of fact. It's just built to the more protected cruiser line of thinking rather than the interwar line of thinking. But at just 4,000 tons, it compares well to a lot of those interwar cruisers, I feel like. That said, the armament is not objectively very good, nor is it very well armored. But on 4,000 tons, I'm not too disappointed. They then follow that with the 3,600 ton Denver, which does make 30 knots, which is pretty damned good for 1915, but she has 3 5-inch guns and a 1-inch belt, so why is this not a destroyer? It's literally got the armor, and frankly, it's got the armament, the speed of a destroyer. Really, it's basically might as well have the armor of a destroyer. What does this do that a destroyer can't? It's just got the range for more independent operations and such, presumably, but I'm not too convinced as a combat unit of its utility. And then they have 5 Tucson class light cruisers, 5,100 tons, 27 knots. 5 6-inch guns, which looks like all centerline, to be fair. 2 3-inch, 3-inch belt. And for the interwar design, this is not bad. They're actually all centerline guns, pretty well armored, and speed is not horrific, just not great. So for an interwar design, this is alright. My conquests are better, but my conquests are not better by a radical margin or anything. Just by like 1 gun and 1 knot of speed. So not a bad design at all by the Tucsons, especially considering their union. They are 2,800 tons lighter, like 2/3 the displacement. So well done on that. Then the Renos, which are basically a similar, well, they've actually kind of screwed the design all up. It's 5,200 tons, 29 knots, 5 6-inch guns and a 1.5-inch belt, but it's only 3 centerline 6-inch guns with 2 on the sides, so it's a 4 6-inch gun broadside. 29 knots. Speed is a little better. Armor is worse, right? Yes, armor is significantly less than the Tucsons. Broadside is actually effectively a gun less as well. And all that to gain 2 knots of speed. I don't think it's worth it. But I'm not really a speed demon kind of builder. But I don't think it's worth it. I would much rather have a Tucson. And then they started building the Dayton class, which, you know, to be fair, these I thought would be good, but they're not really. 5,400 tons, 28 knots, 8 6-inch guns, but it appears only 2 of them are centerline, and not even fore and aft, but both at the... I think that's the stern. It's always hard for me to tell on a lot of these diagrams. I think that's the stern. Should be. Because these are the anchor chains, those are usually at the bow, so yeah. This should be the stern. Which makes it worse, honestly. I'd rather have them at the fore, at the bow, you know, if I'm going to have only 2 centerline guns, but... okay, only 2 centerline guns, so effectively this just has a broadside of 5 6-inch guns still, same as the Renos. No, the Renos only had 4, but same as the Tucsons. And it's a knot faster, but only a 1-inch belt. And, well, more torpedo tubes. Looks like 4 twins, but I would still rather have a Tucson. The extra guns are basically wasted displacement, in all fairness. If you're not going to have more than a 5-gun broadside anyway. And the armor is not good. The speed is not meaningfully better, I wouldn't say. So, yeah. They built 5 of those Daytons. Then they switched to 2 Birminghams, and these are a step back in the right direction, it looks like. 7,400 tons, 33 knots, 7 6-inch guns, of which 5 are centerline, 4 4-inch, and a 2-inch belt. excellent speed, effectively a 6.6-inch gun broadside, so that's excellent. 2-inch belt, not bad at all. 12 torpedo tubes, so that's 4 triples to a side. These actually are probably a match for my conquests. They're significantly faster. 5 full knots. They've got less armor, but not... Yeah, well... Less armor, but quite a lot more torpedo tubes, which could just as easily make the difference. So these are quite nice overall, I think. And equal firepower, so... Quite nice, yeah. Obviously not going to be a match for the latest twin turret cruisers, but not too far off either, to be fair. Then they built 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the Pasadena class. And these are nice twin turret cruisers. 7,600 tons, 32 knots, 8 6-inch, 8 4-inch, 2-inch belt. 8 torpedo tubes, 4 twin mounts. These are pretty much equal to my Bristols or the German Leipzigs. They have an excellent armament, excellent speed, excellent torpedoes, reasonable armor. There's nothing at all wrong with these, really. They're just all around modern, nasty cruisers, I would say. I mean, even just comparing to my Bristols, they're almost identical, just well, they're 200 tons lighter, 2 knots faster, and actually have more torpedo tubes. On the other hand, they still have less armor, I suppose, actually. An inch less belt, and it's hard to say about deck because it just doesn't give us that information, but I wouldn't be surprised, just given the tonnage and speed differences, if they did in fact also have less deck armor than mine. Honestly, that weighs more than the belt generally at this point anyway, at least for small changes. And then most recently, they have 3 Spokanes, which are 7,500 tons, 33 knots, 7 6-inch, 4 4-inch, 3.5-inch belt, and 12 torpedo tubes. So that's 4 triple torpedo tube mounts. Looks like 5 centerline guns and 2 wings, so 6 6-inch gun broadside, 3.5-inch belt, 33 knot. I mean, it's very fast, faster than the Pasadenas, better armored than the Pasadenas. But the Pasadenas only have 8 torpedo tubes as well, so they're equal in that regard to the Bristols. So the difference is, again, just speed versus armor, which is the same as it is with the German Leipzigs, really, compared to my Bristols. But then these Spokanes, these are like the maximum evolution of the interwar design, I guess. 6-inch gun broadside, 4 triple torpedo tubes, 33 knot speed, 3.5-inch belt. Well, they're very fast, they're very well armored. Their gunpowder is really not substantially less than the twin turret. Well, it's 25% less, but a lot of torpedoes as well. I don't know. I can't actually say these are terrible, but it's weird to me that they were built after the Pasadenas. I mean, just for efficiency's sake, surely it would have been easier to just pack extra armor and speed onto a Pasadena. Although I guess not. Well, I mean, certainly you wouldn't have decreased the tonnage by doing that, so there must be something very efficient about this design still, tonnage-wise, but, yeah. I don't know. Not too convinced about building it just now, after having built Pasadenas, but who knows. And now they're building 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7. Yeah, 7. They're building 7 of these 8,000-ton Raleighs. I don't know if they're going to be in the Pasadena line, or if they're going to be in the Spokane line, or they're going to be something else entirely, but they're their biggest cruisers yet, so they should be pretty nasty. And okay, that'll finally bring us to heavy cruisers. Right, so for heavy cruisers, we are going to be looking at, well, we have the clear majority preponderance of heavy cruisers in the world at the moment. Sorry, there's a cut there, if that wasn't obvious enough. So we have the not the preponderance. We definitely have the largest force of heavy cruisers in the world, but the AI is starting to build some very large new designs, I've noticed. Spain is actually second at this point, which I guess is partially because they have 0 light cruisers, but they've now built up to 7 heavy cruisers, 2 more on the way, amounting to 118,000 tons. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 Cataluna class from the late teens. These are 11,900 tonners, 28 knots, 4 10-inch guns and 2 twin turrets, 8 6-inch, and a 5-inch belt. These are almost more like older armored cruisers, sort of. Well, they are fast, they're well armored, they have a heavy main armament and a pretty substantial secondary armament. I'm not entirely sure what to make of them, honestly, because they don't really have. I mean, only 2 twin turrets is not enough, really, on a modern heavy cruiser, but all the 6-inch guns are a very heavy secondary armor. I mean, effectively, they have a broadside of 4 10-inch and 4 6-inch guns, which I suppose is probably at least equal to 8 8-inch. So I think these are really not that bad. I don't know that they're making super efficient use of tonnage, but I don't think they're too bad, honestly. Weird, probably suboptimal, but alright. And then they have 3 Alfonso the 13ths, 14,700 tons, 28 knots, 7 10-inch guns in 2 twin and 1 triple turrets, 14 5-inch, 6 4-inch, and a 5-inch belt, plus 6 torpedo tubes in what looks like 2 triples. So, well, these are actually, I mean, they're big, and for that displacement, they are pretty fast, very heavily armed, and well armored. So I wouldn't say these are bad at all. They certainly have more firepower than any of my existing heavy cruisers. Pretty decent secondary armament, decent armor, good speed. Nothing really wrong with the Spanish cruiser lineup, honestly. It's quite formidable. Except for the fact that it's making up for their total lack of battle cruisers and light cruisers, so bear that in mind when judging their heavy cruisers. Now, Russia has 4 heavy cruisers amounting to 89,000 tons, with 3 more on the way. These are 2 Ochakovs. These are 10,900 tons, 30 knots, 8 8-inch guns, 4 twin turrets, 16 4-inch, and a 4-inch belt. Well, not bad. They're on the lighter end of heavy cruisers, but 8 8-inch guns is about what you would expect these days for the minimum. Decent secondary armament, decent armor, good speed. Not awful. Sort of, as I said, the low end of the modern heavy cruiser, but definitely a modern heavy cruiser and not one with huge flaws. And then they followed that up with 2 Vladivostoks, plus 2 more building and a Marshal Voroshilov. The Vladivostoks are 13,700 tons, 12 8-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, 12 4-inch, and a 4-inch belt. So, very fast, reasonable armor, and quite a heavy 8-inch armament. Obviously nothing bigger like some people have, but this is also a pretty nice heavy cruiser. Not spectacularly well armored, really not that well armed still, but well, 12 8s probably is better than 8 9s, so yeah, quite well armed and very fast, so not bad at all. I'm actually impressed so far by what I've seen from the heavy cruisers here. Austria-Hungary have 3 heavy cruisers amounting to 64,000 tons. These are Marburg from 1924, 14,100 tons, 32 knots, 7 8-inch guns in 2 twin and 1 triple turret, 14 5-inch, 8 4-inch, 4-inch belt. Very fast, alright armor. Kind of a weird armament. Secondaries are pretty good still. Even if having both 4 and 5-inch guns doesn't entirely make sense to me. 7 8-inch and that turret layout are a little weird. So this is a little obsolete now, but not that bad. And then 2 Sigedens, which are 15,000 tons, 29 knots, 7 10-inch guns, same turret layout, 14 5s, 6 4s, and a 5-inch belt. This, compared to the Marburg, adds 900 tons and gains an inch of belt armor and ups the guns from 8 to 10 inch that loses 3 knots of speed. Overall, as a fighting unit, it's definitely more powerful, well armored, a lot heavier in armament, even if it's still a weird turret arrangement. Not as fast, but still pretty fast, so these are pretty formidable, yeah. They're building 2 much smaller cruisers now of the Minerva class. Italy has 5 heavy cruisers amounting to 72,000 tons. These are 3 Anconas of 14,200 tons, 30 knots, 12 8-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, 12 4-inch belt. Good speed, good armor, good armament. I mean, this is a pretty generic heavy cruiser, mid-range, so to speak, but quite nice overall. I guess, apparently the AI is not prone to screwing these up in this era. So far, at least. I wouldn't say, I mean, myself, I don't see much way to vary them that much. So I suppose it's unsurprising. But then again, your basic pre-Dreadnought effective formula is pretty standard too, and the AI screws that up a lot all the time. So I'm surprised I don't see more heavy cruisers that somehow have 6-inch guns only or something on them. Or only 2 turrets or something equally wacky. Then they have 2 San Justos of 14,900 tons, 31 knots, 10 10-inch guns in 2 twin and 2 triple turrets, 10 5-inch, 4 3-inch, and a 4.5-inch belt. Quite fast, pretty well armored, extremely heavy firepower. It's a very powerful heavy cruiser. Against other heavy cruisers, it will do great, and it's faster than pretty much all the battle cruisers that are around so far, although there's a few that the AI has built that are even faster, so. But these are quite formidable as well, I would have to say. Yeah. Not bad at all. Especially given they're facing treaty-limited capital ships, which honestly, these are potentially a threat to. Not to a battleship with a proper armor belt, but treaty-limited battle cruiser is still better than this, but not enough better to face 2 of these, maybe. Although that'll treaty limitation has just collapsed, of course, but it was in existence when those were built. Then we have Japan. They have 7 heavy cruisers amounting to basically 90,000 tons, of which 6 are the Aso class, 12,800 tons, 29 knots, 6 10-inch guns and 3 twin turrets, 8 6-inch, 6 4-inch, and a 3.5-inch belt. Little light on the armor, but not that bad. Broadside is basically 6 10-inch and 4 6-inch guns, which makes it pretty damn heavy, but I'd still rather... I would trade away the 6-inchers to get just the extra 10-inch turret, but maybe that wasn't possible technologically for them. Speed is good, but nothing outstanding. So, it's not a terrible cruiser, but I mean, I don't love how mixed the armament is, I suppose. And the armor is a little on the light side as well. These aren't as terrifying as a lot of the AI designs, and I would probably bet on my own designs of similar displacement over this, although not by a huge margin. And then they built 1 Auba, 13,100 tons, 30 knots, 8 9-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 8 5-inch, 8 4-inch, and a 4.5-inch belt. Pretty fast, pretty well armored, pretty well armed. This is, well, quite nice, and really, out of all of them, this bears probably the most resemblance to my heavy cruisers that we've seen so far. Pretty much the armament I tend to use. Speed, better than mine. Armor, quite decent. The AI's heavy cruisers, now that it's finally building them, are pretty heavy overall on average. A lot of 10-inch and 9-inch guns going around. At high speeds as well. Mine are mostly lighter, actually. France has 4 heavy cruisers, plus 3 more building, which will tally up to 93,000 tons. The oldest is La Touche Treville, which is under construction, but it appears it has 15,500 tons, 8 9-inch and 10 6-inch guns and a 29 knot speed. No word on the armor belt. But it's a pretty damn heavy armament. Pretty large size, of course, not that fast. Armor hard to say. It's probably a pretty formidable combatant, but perhaps will be showing its age a little bit by this point. On the other hand, I think without looking at them yet, that I would bet on it over these Desays, which are the other three. 13,000 tons, 32 knots, 6 8-inch guns and 3 twin turrets, 12 5-inch, 6 3-inch, 4-inch belt. These are underarmed. Considering the standard we've seen the AI set so far, where the minimum is 8 8-inch and a lot have like 10 10-inch or something, these are very fast. Their armor's alright. Their armament is just definitely lacking. 3 twin 8-inch turrets is not going to cut it. Really, it's not even, it's not as good as OTL, that is original timeline, real world heavy cruisers, let alone this timeline's super heavy cruisers. So, not loving those. Germany, then, has 6 heavy cruisers in one building, amounting to 98,000 tons. They have Friedrich Karl, which is 17,700 tons, 32 knots, 10 8-inch guns in 2 twin, 2 triple turrets. Right? Yeah, looks like it. 14 5-inch, 6 4-inch, and a 7-inch armor belt. It's very fast. It's exceptionally well armored. Better than some people's battle cruisers. It's not that well armed. Well armed, but not that well armed. I don't know that it's really worth it on a heavy cruiser to have a 7-inch armor belt, to be honest. I mean, if you said, would I rather have the 7-inch armor belt, or would I rather have all of those 8-inch guns be 9-inch or 10-inch guns instead, I would rather have the guns on a heavy cruiser. And overall, I don't know. It's not bad as a ship, now that they built it, but it seems like a bit of a waste, an inefficient usage of tonnage, perhaps. Then they have 2 Prinz Adalberts, 13,200 tons, 31 knots, 8 8-inch guns, 12 4-inch, and a 4-inch belt. See, the thing is, these are slower, less armored, significantly less armored, and a bit less armed, but there's 13,200 tons themselves, which is kind of a lot for what they have out of them, actually. I guess they've got a lot more speed than my ships, but, these aren't that much worse than the Friedrich Karl here, except for the armor belt. And there's quite a bit of tonnage saved, so I don't know. And then 3 Hansa class, 13,500 tons, 31 knots, 10 8-inch guns, 2 twin, 2 triple turrets, 14 4-inch, and a 3.5-inch belt. Well, so they maintain the speed from the, what were they, Prinz Adalberts. They get their 10 8-inch guns back. Well, okay, compare these to a Friedrich Karl. Same armament, effectively, lighter secondaries. 1 knot slower and a lot less armor. I don't know if it's worth packing on the extra 4,000 tons to get a thicker armor belt. Maybe. On a ship this size, it's questionable for me. But these in themselves, these Hansas, are not bad at all. These are pretty decent all-around heavy cruisers. They're getting a little lightly armored, truth be told, but not bad at all. And they're building one more. None of them are spectacularly well armed either, in a world where a lot of heavy cruisers have 9 or 10-inch guns. And then we have, well, myself. I do still have the largest heavy cruiser force in the world by hulls and tonnage at 12 ships, amounting to 150,000 tons even. 4 of these are the Andromedas at 12,700 tons apiece, 28 knots, 8 9-inch guns, 4 twin turrets, 12 5-inch, 4-inch belt, 2-inch deck. These are pretty much the original modern heavy cruiser in this world, as they were laid down in they were laid down in probably 1915 or 16, but they were finished in 1917. They're pretty fast. They're not fast by modern standards, though, but they're alright still. Their armament is still decent, although the turret layout now leaves something to be desired. Secondaries aren't spectacular, but they're alright compared to what the AI has. Armor is pretty decent. These were very exceptional 13 years ago. They are no longer very exceptional compared to the designs the AI are building. But just in terms of armament and speed and Well, not so much in terms of speed, but they're not that bad. In terms of armament and armor, they still stand up to most of what the AI is building. Not all. Some of those super big 10-inch gunned heavy cruisers will definitely beat these, but they're not out of place. And then we follow those with the 8 Creasy class vessels of 12,400 tons, 27 knots, 8 9-inch, 16 5-inch, 4-inch belt, 2-inch deck. I mean, these are frankly a budget version. They have. That is still 4 twin turrets. I'm not actually sure myself where the 4th turret is right now. I think it might be under the bridge structure here or here. I don't know, but take my word for it, there are 4 twin turrets in there. And basically, these are a knot slower. They gain more secondary armament. They clearly changed the turret layout somehow. I'm not sure how. And otherwise are very, very similar to the Andromedas and pretty much stand up the same. They're just a little slower, but a little heavier secondary armament. Maybe a tweaked turret layout. And I saved 300 tons, which made it easier to build more of them. So they stand up very similarly to the Andromedas overall. And so then that will bring us around to, well, the big ships. And also just the new ships, because we will go over carriers next. Now, Spain has no light carriers, but they do have 2 fleet carriers in service, along with a total of 5 aviation vessels. Spain in all has 130 naval aircraft and 40 airships. So their aviation vessels, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. 4 of them are your very typical early 5 aircraft affairs. They also have the 8,600-ton Riolid, which is only a 22-knot ship, so she's certainly not keeping up with a modern fleet. But she does carry 18 aircraft. No flight deck, though, so it's all seaplanes. It's just a proper seaplane carrier as opposed to a sort of primitive early experimental aviation ship. Now, the real core of the Spanish seagoing carrier force is Princesa de Asturias and Zaragoza. Same class, 17,000 tons, 27 knots, 8 6-inch guns, 12 4-inch, dual purpose, a 1-inch belt, and 49 aircraft apiece. I don't have anything to compare these to yet. I'm pretty sure they're rather small, even for first-generation carriers. The armament is pretty much forced for first-generation carriers, so I wouldn't worry about that. Their speed is alright, but not great. Their aircraft capacity is alright, but not great, I think. And I don't think their armor belt is that great. Let me just... where is... Let's see here. Just remember for comparison that our current carrier, which we'll go over properly later, but has 30 knot speeds, 60 aircraft, and has flight deck armor. Although I don't think it really tells us if these have flight deck armor, so maybe they do. It pretty much just still gives us the belt, I think. Anyway, so that's Spain's fleet. Effectively 98 aircraft. Not super fast or anything special as far as the carriers go. Then Russia has a total of 244 naval aircraft. But in terms of what's actually at sea, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these little 5 aircraft seaplane carriers. One larger seaplane carrier, Urino, which 12,200 tons, 29 knots, 34-inch, 2.5-inch belt, carries 24 aircraft, but it's still a seaplane carrier without a flight deck, so kind of limited capacity in that regard. Their one real carrier is Paracop, 11,900 tons, 28 knots, 8 6-inch, 8 4-inch, 1-inch belt, 28 aircraft. Fine for a light carrier. Not sure it's a super efficient use of tonnage all around. I mean, the 8 6-inch guns are going to bite pretty hard on a ship this size, actually. And then, so only 28 aircraft out of 12,000 tons. Not that spectacular when you consider the Spanish had 50 out of 17,000 tons, so. And it's their only carrier, so nothing impressive from Russia yet. Austria-Hungary has a much larger carrier force, actually. 209 total naval aircraft, which is less, but a lot more at sea. They've got one small 5-aircraft aviation vessel, Oberwelak, one larger seaplane carrier, Weissensee, which 16 aircraft, but still no flight deck, of course. And then they've got the 2 Falca class light carriers, which are 15,800 tons, 31 knots, 8 6-inch guns, 2.5-inch belt, 32 aircraft. Decent belt, perhaps decent other armor. Fast. Well armed if she were a light cruiser, but the lack of dual purpose or anything is not that great for a carrier. And then 32 aircraft, which is about standard for a light carrier. It's pretty heavy for a light carrier carrying 32 aircraft, to be honest. It is fast, or she's fast, that is, sorry. But I'm not overly impressed with these light carriers. They're pretty standard, though. And then the PEX, which is, well, this is kind of what I was talking about, though. This is, okay, but this is not good, though. 7,900 tons, 24 knots, 8 6-inch, 8 4-inch, 26 aircraft, unarmored. Unarmored's not great, even for a carrier. Still carrying this heavy armament is not great, because that's taking up a ridiculous amount of her displacement at only 7,900 tons. Hence why she only makes 24 knots and carries 26 aircraft, so that's not a great ship at all, I think. The prides of the fleet are Krakow and Bukowina. They're one carrier class. These are 14,600 tons, 29 knots, 6 6-inch, 2 4-inch, 2-inch belt, 37 aircraft. Honestly, they're rather small. The armament is kind of weird and meh. The armor is fine. The speed is fine, but not exceptional. Not a whole lot of aircraft, really. So they've got a few hulls, 3 light and 2 fleet carriers, but the fleet carriers are barely bigger than, actually, by displacement they're smaller, but by aircraft they're barely bigger than the light carriers, and well, practically speaking, these are the actual prides of the fleet. They're literally bigger and better armored and faster than the Krakows. The Krakows just carry 5 more aircraft, but I would take one of these Falcas over one of the Krakows, I think, if I had to pick 2 to take into battle. I wouldn't quite build any of them the way they are, but yeah. I don't know, not overly impressed with the hulls the Austrians have there, let's just say. And then Italy has a total of 399 naval aircraft, which is quite a few at this point. I mean, compares, well, way favorably to me, but yeah, it builds a lot more land-based bases than me, but favorably compared to, say, France or Japan or Austria-Hungary or Spain, so equal to Germany. I mean, it's actually, it's what, 3rd most after Germany and the USA, so yeah, pretty good. In terms of hulls at sea, they have, well, 4 proper carriers plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 smaller seaplane carriers. Their light carriers are Centauro and Sirio. These are 8,000 ton, 24 knot, 8 6-inch, 26 aircraft. But again, they're awfully slow. The 6-inch guns are taking up an awful lot of displacement, so this style of light carrier, it doesn't work that well. I think it's necessary maybe for 1st-gen light carriers to some extent, but it doesn't work that well. And then they have Nibbio and Persio for their fleet carriers. These are 17,000 tons, 30 knots, 6 6-inch, 14 4-inch, 2.5-inch belt, 42 aircraft. Yeah, it's better than what the better than what the Austrians had, right? A good dual-purpose armament, pretty fast, reasonable armor. Still not a whole lot of aircraft for a fleet carrier, to be honest, but it's still rather small for a fleet carrier as well, to be honest, so they're working with what they had. Keep in mind, carriers were limited by the treaty until just now as well. So any carrier tonnage was stealing from battleship, battlecruiser tonnage. Now, Japan has 319 total naval aircraft and quite a few hulls at sea. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these small seaplane carriers, and then for light carriers, they've got they've got Zuiho and Shoho of the Zuiho class, 11,200 tons, 28 knots, 8 6-inch, 8 4-inch, 31 aircraft. Like most of these early light carriers, a lot of tonnage wasted on guns, but not super fast, but fast enough. Not a whole lot of aircraft, but these are getting the job done for early light carriers, I would say. No armor, of course, but that's to be expected. Then they have Junyo, Chitose, and Ryuho, which are 15,700 tons, 31 knots, 8 6-inch, 12 4-inch, 2.5-inch belt, and 32 aircraft. These are fast, well armed, but again, these 6-inch guns, why? I don't think they're mandatory after the first class, but maybe I'm wrong. 2.5-inch belt, 32 aircraft. I mean, their speed is good, their armor is good. Although, the flight deck armor and such is more pertinent, really, than the belt on a carrier, but we just don't get to see that. They're not terrible. They're actually pretty dang heavy for only carrying 32 aircraft, so they're not great either. Then for fleet carriers, they have Soryu, which is 17,100 tons, 29 knots, 8 6-inch, 10 4-inch, 2-inch belt, 42 aircraft. Reasonably fast, but not spectacular. Some dual-purpose armament, but also these 6-inch guns still. Acceptable belt. Not a whole lot of aircraft, but it's a tonnage restriction. I mean, it's tonnage restricted, I mean. It's a pretty small fleet carrier, is what I'm trying to say. So, not terrible. Nothing special. And then they have Hiryu and Zuikaku, which are 17,100 tons, 28 knots, 8 6-inch, 10 4-inch, half-inch belt, 49 aircraft. These appear to be basically just Soryu, except a knot slower, and they ripped off all the armor in order to squeeze 7 more aircraft on. Honestly, it might be better for that, but I don't like the idea of having a half-inch belt only. Well, it's not the half-inch belt that's the problem. Honestly, that's probably fine. It's they probably stripped all the other armor off if they stripped all the belt off, but it's hard to say. More aircraft is better. Losing speed is not better, so I would say it's about the same as the Soryus, really. Then we have France. They have 385 total naval aircraft. They don't have a fleet carrier yet. They do have 4 light carriers, and also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the smaller aviation ships, and 1 larger 16 aircraft seaplane carrier, Joiny. Their main fleet are the light carriers Aramanches, Poipo, and Dauphine, which are 15,500 tons, 30 knots, 8 6-inch, 12 4-inch, dual purpose, 2-inch belt, 32 aircraft. Pretty standard early light carriers. Like most of them, they're not really getting that many aircraft per ton, probably because of all the 6-inch guns and 4-inch guns and armor and so on, but they are fast, so these are reasonable fleet-light carriers at least. And, oh, they have one other light carrier, actually, which is the Conversion Rune. I'm going to go ahead and say this is for sure a conversion. She's 35,200 tons, 28 knots, 8 4-inch guns, a 10-inch belt, and carries 23 aircraft. As a carrier, she's pretty damn bad, let's be honest. She's not really even well armed anymore. Not especially fast, ridiculously over armored, and does not really carry very many aircraft. Also, she takes up an awful lot of tonnage under the treaty system for a capital ship. I mean, she takes up the tonnage of a 35,000 ton carrier, which is that kind of carrier could carry probably 80 to 100 aircraft easily in theory. So this thing is, I mean, it's the mandatory conversion that you have to do, but they have not done a great job with it, to be honest. This thing's a bit of an abomination. They're building a new fleet carrier, Painlev, which will probably be much better, because they're building her from scratch, it looks like. And so that'll bring us over to Germany. They have 402 naval aircraft, which is the second most in the world. They don't have a fleet carrier at sea yet, but they do have 118,000 tons worth of light carriers. They have one small seaplane carrier, one larger Blankense with 16 aircraft, and then they have SMS Elbrine, Dinkel, and Jade for one class of light carriers. These are 12,700 tons, 28 knots, 8.6-inch, 8.4-inch, 1-inch belt, 27 aircraft. Not super fast, not terrible. The armament that they had to have, I think. Basic armor. Not a whole lot of aircraft, even considering all that, so pretty standard to low-end early light aircraft carriers. Not egregiously bad, but not very good either. And they followed that up with Weserwils, Varno, and Salzach, which are 14,200 tons, 30 knots, 8.6-inch, 8.4-inch, 3-inch belt, 32 aircraft. Well, for being a good bit larger, 1,500 tons, these have gained 2 knots of speed, inch and a half of belt armor, and 5 aircraft, which is 2 inches of belt armor and 5 aircraft, which is pretty good actually for 1,500 tons. So these are definitely an improvement. These aren't bad all around actually at this point for light carriers. Pretty fast, pretty well armored. More respectable number of aircraft, still not great. And that will bring us over to ourselves. We have 172 naval aircraft, almost all of them ground-based. Our total at-sea aircraft complement currently consists of the pocket light carrier HMS Battler. She is 6,200 tons, 27 knots, 4 5-inch guns, 1-inch belt, 1-inch deck, and carries a total of 12 aircraft. Honestly, for having to keep a mandatory carrier in service to keep research going during the treaty system, I think she's a great use of tonnage. That said, she's not going to be of much value in a combat situation, in all honesty. She might provide a very limited cap for the fleet, perhaps. She's not able to do much more than that. I'm kind of counting on the fact of getting out of the treaty system and into a war before carriers really count. And I think I've succeeded in doing that, frankly, because, well, we've just gone to war February 1930, and carriers are kind of effective now, but not super effective yet. We're still mostly talking biplanes. Pretty much exclusively talking biplanes, actually, in terms of carrier-based aircraft, I think. So, I mean, Battler here is just a test bed, basically. She can maybe provide a little bit of cap, and we're just counting on the rest of the world's fleets to not sink us. We are, however, moving on from that, as we are building HMS Courageous, which is a 23,200-ton carrier capable of 30 knots, 8 6-inch guns, mandatory for the first design here still, 12 4-inch, 2-inch belt, 1-inch deck, 1-inch flight deck, and 60 aircraft. She is bigger than any of the AI designs I've seen in commission so far, although we haven't looked at the USA yet. She's fast, she's well armed, including dual-purpose armament and AA. She's well armored. I don't know that any of the AI designs had flight deck armor, although it's possible they did. And she carries by far the most aircraft of anything we've seen so far. So overall, this will be a very nice early fleet carrier for us, I am pretty sure. But we'll see what the AI is doing, in a couple years' time with no treaty limits. Now, the USA has, I believe, the world's largest carrier fleet overall at the moment, and the most naval aircraft total with 624. They have 3 fleet and 4 light carriers actually in service, along with 2 small seaplane carriers, and then Strive, Thursil, and Tide with 16, 14, and 18 aircraft, respectively. And then for light carriers, they have 2 conversions which are a little questionable, to say the least. The USS United States, 20,800 tons, 27 knots, 6 4-inch guns, 9.5-inch belt, carries 16 aircraft. It's a conversion, and no 21,000-ton carrier should only be carrying 16 aircraft in 1930. Pretty much the same with USS Bonhomme Richard, which is 28,000 tons, 25 knots, 6 4-inch, 9.5-inch belt, 19 aircraft. Yeah, no 28,000. That's actually egregiously worse. 7,200 tons heavier. She loses 2 knots of speed and gains 3 aircraft. Yeah. Um, for sure, a 28,000 ton carrier should not have 19 aircraft. Obviously, sorry, hold on. Obviously, she's subject to the limitations of being a conversion, but like most all conversions, she's a pretty egregious waste of tonnage. Except that it's mandatory to build one at the start, but under the treaty system, having a conversion, 2 conversions like this really hurts, honestly. I'm starting to see why they scrapped so many battleships, because these are both really pinching into their capital ship tonnage. Then they have Bogue and Nassau, which are proper light carriers, 7,900 tons, 24 knots, 8 6-inch, 8 4-inch, 26 aircraft. They're very size efficient in terms of the number of aircraft they carry, frankly, but they're very slow also, which is not great. So these are going to be minimally effective because they can't really keep up with the fleet very well anymore. Although most battleships are still, they can keep up with most battleships, but not most cruisers, let's put it that way. Or pretty much any cruisers. And then they have 3 fleet carriers, USS Ranger, Yorktown, and Langley, which are one class, 19,300 tons, 30 knots, 8 6-inch, 14 4-inch, 1-inch belt, 53 aircraft. I mean, compared to my Courageous class, these are easily the best fleet carriers I've seen actually in commission right now. They're fast, pretty well armed, including dual purpose, and they carry quite a lot of aircraft. Their armor is minimal, but carrier armor generally should be. It's impossible to say from this for sure whether they have armored the flight deck at all. But compared to my Courageous, they're pretty much comparable in every way, except for being slightly smaller and slightly less aircraft. I would guess from a tonnage comparison that probably they don't have an armored flight deck, but it's just a guess. Overall, these are pretty decent early fleet carriers, though. And so from there, we will move on to the proper, well, we'll say these are probably still the proper capital ships, the kings of the sea at this point. Carriers are not quite there yet. Give them just another 5 or 10 years now, but they're not quite there yet. The battle cruisers and the battleships. Strictly treaty limited until just a month ago, so everybody has a pretty prescribed number of them compared to their budget. Spain has put their whole budget into 5 battleships amounting to 137,000 tons. All of different classes, just for fun. So they have San Leandro, which is 23,300 tons, 21 knots, 12 12-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, 14 6-inch, 4 4-inch, 11-inch belt. Well, it's not that bad. I mean, it's well armed, assuming those are actually modern 12-inch guns, which is dicey coming from Spain, but well armed, not super fast, but not super slow. Reasonable, not great armor. I mean, it's not an outstanding dreadnought. This is actually Arrogant. It's just a class that doesn't exist anymore, but Arrogant here is not an outstanding dreadnought, but she's got pretty reasonable armament for the treaty limitations. Let's not forget, all capital ships until a month ago were strictly limited to 25,000 tons and 13-inch guns for new builds, which practically meant mostly 12-inch guns. So this is not a treaty battleship. She was completed before the treaty, but she's pretty close to being a treaty battleship in most ways, and she stacks up reasonably against most of them. A little under-armored, for sure, particularly. And then they have Almoradiel, which I don't know how the hell they were allowed to finish this. I guess they must have finished this. Was the treaty signed in 22 or 23? I can't remember. It must have been signed in 23, because somehow they managed to get these 3 ships out. Almoradil, 29,300 tons, 26 knots, 8 15-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 12 5-inch, 8 4-inch, and 11.5-inch belt. This I have never noticed the existence of. I've been completely sleeping on this. Technically, for most of the last decade, this has probably been one of the most powerful battleships in the world. She's actually very fast. She's probably one of about only like 14 inch, 14 inch, 14 inch, 14. Yeah. She and her immediate two successors in Spanish service are literally the only battleships in the world with 15-inch guns, and have been for the better part of a decade. I never noticed them because I kind of assumed Spain wouldn't have anything worth looking at. But, good for Spain, I guess. Their armor is not that great. But, and who knows how bad the 15-inch guns might be. But this is really quite a formidable dreadnought under the treaty system. I mean, this could sink almost any treaty battleship, most likely. And then Canarias, 28,900 tons, 26 knots, 8 15-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 10 6-inch, 6 4-inch, and 11-inch belt. Very similar. Fast. 15-inch guns that literally no one else in the world can match. An 11-inch belt's a little light, but, you know, also a very dangerous dreadnought, honestly. And then Reina Regente, 29,300 tons, 27 knots, 7 15-inch guns in 1 triple and 2 twin turrets, 14 5-inch, 6 3-inch, and 12-inch belt. Better armored, a little faster even. I don't really love losing the gun, barrel, and the turret. So I would call this worse, honestly, but this is basically a battlecruiser design, except a battlecruiser should make 30 knots nowadays, but mine don't, so it's basically a battlecruiser design, just kind of a weird one. Or just a very, very fast battleship for this period, I guess. Also pretty formidable, ultimately, considering nobody else has 15-inch guns. And then here is their treaty battleship, the only one they have, Numancia the First, 26,300 tons. They are authoritarian, so they've been cheating on the tonnage. 25 knots, 10 12-inch guns in 2 twin and 2 triple turrets, 14 5-inch, 4 3-inch, and an 11-inch belt. So, not bad for a treaty battleship. I mean, pretty much the sort of armament most people have been fitting onto them. If anything, an extra barrel compared to my treaty battleships, but less armor. I don't know how thick the deck is, potentially a lot. On the other hand, I don't trust Spanish tech that much, so pretty fast, pretty well armed, not super well armored. For being backwards, the Spanish battleship force is pretty damn nice, actually. Like, none of these are egregiously bad. Even the oldest one. So, well done, Spain, I guess. Okay, then we have Russia. They have 7 battleships amounting to 172,000 tons and 1 battle cruiser of 32,000 tons. The battle cruiser is Sinop, which is a pre-treaty holdover. 32,300 tons, 29 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 2 triple and 2 twin turrets, 24 6-inch, 4 4-inch, and a 10-inch belt. Fast, still. Not super fast anymore, but fast. Extremely well armed, especially considering no one has been able to build a 14-inch battlecruiser basically since she was completed. Although the 6-inch secondaries are weird, but very good against light cruisers and such, just not so much against destroyers. Armor belt is not that outstanding, but honestly, by AI battlecruiser standards, is pretty good. So this is a pretty damn formidable battlecruiser still. Then for battleships, they have Imperatricia Maria and Mironesets of the Sisoi Veliki class, which are near 20 years old now. These are 21,900 tons, 21 knots, 12 12-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, 10-inch belt, Their armament is still pretty strong, although not super firing or anything, so that's a little weird. But still a pretty strong all-around armament. Speed is no longer great, but is still kind of acceptable. Armor is pretty lacking on these, though. That's their main flaw, and it's pretty significant. Then another big pre-treaty holdover, Petropavlovsk's 27,800 tons, 22 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, 14 5-inch, 4 3-inch, 9.5-inch belt. Speed, no longer exceptional, but still fine. Armament, monstrous in 1930, in a world where no one has built a battleship with more than 12-inch guns in nearly a decade. 10 14-inch guns makes her pretty much a rarity and a really exceptional ship. However, her armor is pretty bad, really. For a battleship, a modern battleship, I don't know how thick her deck is, maybe better than her belt, but it's not very good armor, really, to be honest. Then we have Imperatricia Ekaterina Velikaya, which is probably the last... Oh, well, okay, well. A pre-treaty ship, 27,400 tons, 24 knots, 12 12-inch guns, 14 6-inch and 2 torpedo tubes. It's really going to come down. I mean, she's quite a bit faster. She's well armed. She should be able to hold her own against any treaty battleship. It just depends on how good her armor is, which is very hard to say. Theoretically, I think it could be pretty decent on that tonnage with that kind of speed and gun power, but Russia's tech isn't that great, so it's hard to say. Okay, then they have three oh my god, why? What is this word? Three Ierarha. And Pervanets, which are sisters, 24,600 tons, 27 knots, 8 12-inch guns in 2 triple and 1 twin turrets. No super firing, just in the midships twin turret. 18 5-inch, 4 3-inch, and a 10.5-inch belt. Well, that makes 27 knots, which is pretty exceptional. On the other hand, the armament is quite weak, even for a treaty battleship. And the armor is also quite weak, even for a treaty battleship. So, other than being fast, these don't have a whole lot going for them, to be honest with you. Then they built Johannes Latuste, which is 24,200 tons, 26 knots, 6 12-inch guns in 3 twin turrets, 18 5-inch, 4 3-inch, and a 13-inch belt. Well, this is still very fast, pretty well armored now, quite well armored, really. But now with a really quite anemic main armament of just 6 12-inch guns, which there are a lot of treaty battleships floating around out there with 10 to 12 12-inch guns. And this thing might be faster than them mostly, but it will be smashed by them on just sheer firepower. So I don't know about Johannes Latuste, but Russia will just do Russian things. Right, then Austria-Hungary have 5 battleships amounting to 137,000 tons and 3 battle cruisers amounting to 74,000 tons. The battle cruisers are Ruritanian and Crane from 1914 and 18. These are 24,000 tons, 24 knots, 8 12s in 4 twin turrets, 12 4-inch, 4 3-inch, 9.5-inch belt. Ooh. These guys really would have been perfect candidates to be replaced under the treaty, because they're very close to treaty max as it is in terms of displacement and armament. But you could have gotten a lot more not displacement and armament, but you could have gotten a lot more speed and armor and potentially upgraded armament by straight up replacing them under the treaty. As it is, they're really quite obsolete, to be honest. For a battlecruiser, there are quite a few battleships that are now this fast, including my own latest class. They're not really well armed, even for a treaty battlecruiser or battleship. They're just mediocre at best, and their armor is pretty weak. I mean, good-ish for a battlecruiser at the time, but pretty weak now as battlecruisers get closer and closer to being just fast battleships. And then they have Tyrol, which is a treaty battlecruiser, 26,000 tons, 29 knots, 7 12-inch guns in 1 triple and 2 twin turrets, 10 6-inch, 14 4-inch, 11.5-inch belt. Not too sold on this either. It's very fast. Armor is pretty good, especially for a battlecruiser. So yeah, quite good for a battlecruiser, yeah. Armament is not that great. Well, I can't say it's that bad, because it is fast and well armored, and the armament isn't that terrible, but the armament is not anything special either, even for under the treaty system, so I mean, I really would have at least maybe gone for 3 triple turrets or something. I feel like it would have been easily worth sacrificing a knot to get 3 triple turrets, I don't know. Or some of those 6-inch guns that they have for presumably anti-cruiser duties, but just why? So I don't love it. For battleships, they have their one really proud legacy ship, Bowman, from 1915. 23,800 tons, 22 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 2 twin, 2 triple turrets, 14 4-inch, 4 3-inch, 7.5-inch belt. But I wouldn't scrap it either because it has 14-inch guns that have been irreplaceable for the last decade. But secondary armament, fairly anemic for a modern capital ship. Speed, not terrible, but no longer very good. Armor was honestly very bad even when she was built and has only gotten worse, especially as I guarantee the deck is proportionally at least as bad, if not worse, because deck has been increasing more than belt. So yes, it's got a lot of firepower, although if they didn't refit her, they might be pretty old guns at this point. But speed is alright, but armor is just very bad on this ship. She's a bit of a glass cannon for sure. Kind of like a battle cruiser conceptually, except not fast, which is a problem. And then we have Erzerholm, Franz Ferdinand, Wien, and Slavonian, which are just pre-treaty, 29,000 tons, 23 knots, 13 12-inch guns in 3 triple and 2 twin turrets, utilizing what appears to be cross-deck firing, 12 5-inch and 10 3-inch, and a 12-inch belt. Speed is good. Armor is good. Armament is pretty heavy, to be honest. I mean, exceeding probably most any treaty battleship, but it's just so weird. I can't say objectively the ship is bad, but why are we using cross-deck fire on a ship built in 1919? I mean, it's got a broadside of at least 11 12-inch guns, so it's not like she's badly armed one way or another, but weird. Very weird. They've got 3 of these. Okay, then from post-treaty, most recently they have Habsburg. 26,100 tons, 25 knots, 8 12-inch guns in 2 triple and 1 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 6 3-inch, 12-inch belt. Pretty fast. Pretty well armored. Reasonably armed. I can't say this is terrible for a treaty battleship. I'm pretty sure the American treaty battleships are scarier. Unsurprisingly, given the tech difference. They're not that well armed, even for considering the treaty limitation. Nor are they spectacularly armored in the modern day, but they're at least well armored. Which is more than a lot of early AI designs can say. And they're pretty fast, so they're not terrible. I think my treaty battleships would clear them, but they're not terrible. I say they, there's only one, so yeah. They didn't build a lot under the treaty, just the one battleship, one battle cruiser. Which is fair enough. The AI has caught up a lot on light ships to some extent under the treaty. They're still honestly mostly behind, but they've built a lot of light ships. I would say. Many of them. Anyway, so that's Spain, Russia, Austria, Hungary. Italy has 4 battleships amounting to 109,000 tons and 6 battle cruisers amounting to 178,000 tons. The only power with more battle cruisers than battleships at the moment, and just straight up the most battle cruisers in the world by hulls and tonnage to be found in Italy. For battle cruisers, we have Lepanto and Attilio Regalo from 1918 and 20. These are 27,900 tons, 29 knots, 9 12-inch guns in 1 triple and 3 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 4 3-inch, and a 12-inch belt. You know, they're pretty nice. I mean, if there had been no treaty, they would have aged more poorly, but with the treaty, they're quite fast, they're quite well armored, and they're really not badly armed with the treaty holding people down, so these are pretty damn formidable battlecruisers still. There will definitely be better very shortly, now that the treaty's over, but these are pretty formidable at the moment. Then we have Francesco Caracciolo and Scipione Africano, which are just squeezed out pre-treaty, I believe. These are 34,700 tons, 28 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 6 4-inch, and a 9.5-inch belt. They're fast, not outstandingly fast for today, but fast enough. They're extremely well armed. Their armor's a little lacking, actually. But I certainly would never get rid of them. Well, I would now that the treaty's over now, maybe, but they're pretty much irreplaceable with the 14-inch guns. They've got some of the most firepower, probably, of about any battlecruisers in the world. So, fair play to Italy. These are pretty formidable at the moment. However, their armor is going to cost them in the long run. It's not great for a modern battlecruiser. And then they have 2 treaty battlecruisers built recently, Cornelio Silla and Ottaviano Augusto. These are 26,800 tons. Boy, they're really cheating, huh? 29 knots, 8 12-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 8 5-inch, 12 3-inch, 12-inch belt. They're fast, they're well armored, they're reasonably armed. They're not really better than the Lepantos, particularly. But that's to be expected with the treaty tonnage limitations, probably. Although, honestly, I'm surprised 12 years of tech development didn't save them more tonnage effectively than that. Like, I would expect to be able to... They built the Lepantos with this on 27,900 tons in 1918. I would expect to get more than a basically equal ship with one less gun on just 1,100 tons less 12 years later, to be honest. Still, these aren't bad. They're pretty typical, decent, all-round treaty battle cruisers, I would say. Now then, for battleships, they have Montebello from 1913, 22,100 tons, 22 knots, 11 12-inch guns in 3 triple and 1 twin turrets, 8 5-inch, 14 3-inch, 9.5-inch belt. Speed's alright, but not great. Armament is alright, not great. Especially as hardly any of it's super firing, or at least only half of it. Armor is pretty poor, so this ship is definitely... If the treaty had gone on any longer, this would have been a pretty easy candidate for a replacement with a 25,000-ton ship, which probably could have had a lot more capability in terms of armor and speed, if not armament. As it is, she's pretty dated, probably. The most modern treaty battleships will definitely wreck her. Then Roma and Leonardo da Vinci, 28,800 tons, 24 knots, 10 12-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, and a 12-inch belt. Fast, pretty well armored, pretty well armed. Honestly, I've got no particular complaint against the Roma class. These are pretty nice battleships, I would say. Nothing ridiculously terrifying and outstanding, but pretty nice. Some people are building slightly better stuff today, and well, post-treaty, much better stuff will be built shortly, but they're not bad at all. Then they built Napoli in 1919, 29,400 tons, 23 knots, 8 14-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 10 3-inch, 10.5-inch belt. Fast enough. Well armed with some of those irreplaceable 14-inch guns. Not super well armored, though, so... It's got more vulnerability than the Romas do. Objectively, the armament is better, but she's a little slower and worse armored, so I'm not super sold on Napoli. However, I wouldn't get rid of her either. I would probably give her a rebuild to get her up to a faster speed, and well, I can't put more belt armor on, but do whatever you can, basically, because you certainly don't want to lose your only 14-inch guns. Now, however, with the treaty over, you just replace her, presumably. Right, and that'll bring us over to Japan. Japan have 5 battleships, amounting to, well, not 192,000 tons, because they're building 2 more immediately now, and 5 battle cruisers, amounting to 133,000 tons. The battle cruisers first, we have Mishima, Shirabeshi, Ishikari, and Hidaka, all from the same class. These are... oh my god, are they really all on... nope, okay. These are 24,000 tons, 27 knots, 6 14-inch guns in 3 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 8 3-inch, and an 8.5-inch belt. Not Treaty Max battle cruisers, but close to the displacement limit. Quite fast. Well, actually, no. For battle cruisers, speed is fine, but no longer super fast. Armament, I find it hard to argue that they should have been replaced, because 14-inch guns are irreplaceable. On the other hand, I don't know that I wouldn't have preferred, like, 9 to 12-inch guns over 6 14-inch guns. 6 is not a lot of guns for a dreadnought-type ship. The 8.5-inch belt isn't great either, considering... well, I mean, she's a battlecruiser, but as I said, modern battlecruisers are very rapidly coming to the point of totally merging with fast battleships. So she's pretty lightly armored. Her armament is kind of... like, you can't really get rid of the 14-inch guns under the treaty system, but I'm not sure I wouldn't have rather just taken a more 12-inch barrels over only having 6 barrels. And her speed's no longer exceptional, so these are not that great at battle cruisers, honestly. However, just before the treaty, they did squeeze out a monster, actually. I didn't notice this before. Tokachi, 37,600 tons, 28 knots, 8 15-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 12 6-inch, 8 4-inch, and a 12-inch belt. Fast, not exceptionally so for a battlecruiser these days, but fast, very well armored, and a literally unbeatable armament for the era under the treaty system. And considering the Spanish were the only other ones with 15-inch guns, and theirs were all on battleships. The Italians have some battlecruisers with 10 14s, which is pretty much comparable, but the Americans have one equivalent, which we'll get to in a minute. But there's a few other 10 14ers out there. And the Germans don't have them on battlecruisers, only battleships. Overall, with like one American competitor and a couple of 10-14 competitors out there, this pretty much has to have been one of the most powerful battlecruisers in the world for the last decade. She probably would have been pretty... she wouldn't exactly have been obsolete even without the treaty system, but due to the treaty system, she is still just absolutely on top of the world. The latest battlecruisers are faster, but they're not really better armored, and they are significantly less well armed in practice. This thing is still pretty damn powerful and might well age better than any treaty battlecruiser, even one nearly 10 years newer. So well done to Japan getting that thing out right before the treaty. Oh, and then battleships, they have Mikasa and Satsuma. These are 26,800 tons, 22 knots, 10 12-inch guns in 2 triple and 2 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 4 4-inch, and a 12.5-inch belt. Their speed is no longer exceptional, but it's alright. Their armor is good. Their armament is pretty good. Coincidentally, fortunately for them, these are pretty much equal to a Treaty Max battleship, and a modern Treaty Max battleship would be faster, but probably wouldn't have much any other edge on them, so they're still holding up pretty well. In a non-treaty world where there were tons and tons of 14 and 15-inch gunned battleships floating around, these would not be doing so well, but as it is, they're pretty alright still, actually. Kind of a weird thing for them to have been building in 1919, but considering there was no treaty yet, but not bad at all as it is. Then they have Izu, 27,500 tons, 21 knots, 11 12-inch guns in 1 triple and 4 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 10 3-inch, 12-inch belt. Speed is fine, armor is good. Armament? Why, again? Why cross-deck firing in 1920? I mean, she has a 9-gun broadside minimum up to 11, which is quite nice, and she's still, again, except for in speed, is going to be competitive with the latest Treaty Max battleships, maybe also in deck armor. Hard to say how far tech has come exactly. But the cross-deck firing is just weird. It's going to cause her to age not great for her displacement. However, all the Treaty Max type battleships, not that this technically is one, but any that resemble that as well, they're all going to age pretty damn badly, pretty fast now that the treaty is over, because I can assure you nobody's going to be laying down any more 12-inch battleships. Well, actually, I can't assure you because I don't know what the AI might get into its head, but I, for one, will certainly not be laying down any more 12-inch gunned battleships, and I doubt the AI will either, to be honest. Spoilers, but although they haven't done it yet, as of this 1 month later, by like 12 months later, where we are in the campaign, the US has laid down a bunch of like 40 or 50,000 ton monster battleships, and I'm pretty sure everyone else is following suit, as you would basically expect. So that was Izu, and then they have Yashima, which they got out just before the treaty, and this is another pretty nice ship, 32,400 tons, 22 knots, 9 14-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, 16 6-inch and a 12.5-inch belt. Speed is fine. Armor is pretty good. Armament is tough to beat. I mean, there's no treaty battleship that's going to beat this battleship. Be faster than, maybe. Better deck armor, maybe. For the latest ones, probably not on average. I mean, this thing has a 7,000 tonnage advantage over any treaty battleship, so yeah. And the gun power is just going to be straight up unbeatable. So this is a pretty damned formidable battleship still. No question about it. And then finally, they are building a Treaty Max battleship class, of which they've finished Shikishima and are building 2 more. Shikishima, 26,300 tons, 24 knots, 10 12-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, 14 5-inch, 4 4-inch, 11-inch belt. Honestly, well, it's heavily armed, of course. The 5 twin turrets is a weird choice. I'm not sure why not go with some triples at this point. I think you would save a lot of weight by going with 2 triples, 2 twins, but maybe they have their reasons. Maybe they just haven't invented triple turrets yet. I don't know. Speed is good. Armor is not great, although hopefully, probably she has a better deck, relatively speaking, but from the tonnage, I feel like she should have, but maybe not. It's hard to say exactly what the state of Japanese tech is. From what we can see, her armor doesn't seem that spectacular. But she's a pretty good Treaty Max battleship. Good armament, good speed. Armor, maybe a little iffy. And so then we move over into France. France actually has the world's 2nd largest battle line by tonnage, although that's counting the building battleships, so we'll say, practically speaking, probably the 3rd largest battle line, behind myself and Germany, with 9 battleships amounting to 281,000 tons, well, counting the new one, and 2 battle cruisers for 71,000 tons. The battle cruisers are Turenne from 1921. This is a 35,200 ton monster, 28 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 6 4-inch, and a 10-inch belt. Look, her armor was pretty decent. It still kind of is for a battlecruiser, but it's not that great for a modern battlecruiser. Her speed is also good, but not anything special for a modern battlecruiser. Her armament, however, of course, is extremely powerful and irreplaceable by any treaty battlecruiser, and makes her a very valuable and powerful ship in this world at this point, no doubt about it. So if they have to have only 2 battle cruisers, it's good to have her as one of them. The other one they finished just in time for the treaty is Heroine. She's 35,900 tons, makes 30 knots, 6 15-inch guns in 3 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 6 3-inch, and an 11-inch belt. It's just kind of ruined by the lack. One more turret. One more twin turret. And this would be one of the most powerful ships in the entire world. As it is, she's very fast. She's pretty well armored for a battlecruiser. And objectively, she still has a lot of hitting power. 6 15-inch guns is probably at least equal to like 9 to 10 12-inch guns. It really is, because it's exponential. But or square cube or something, I don't remember, but it's way more than linear anyway. But why only 6 guns, France? Why? It's honestly, this is still a pretty powerful battlecruiser. Just considering the speed, the armor, the 15-inch guns. But just one more 15-inch turret, and she'd be a real delight. I don't know. Now, for battleships, they have Saint Louis from 1918, 28,500 tons, 25 knots, 13 12-inch guns in 3 triple and 2 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 4 4-inch, and a 12-inch belt. Her speed is still good. Her armor is actually still good. And honestly, her armament is still not bad at all either. So, for a pre-treaty battleship, this does a pretty good job of approximating a Treaty Max battleship. Or slightly better than a Treaty Max battleship. My guess is that her deck armor is not that great compared to some of the most modern Treaty Max battleships, but on paper, from what we see here, she doesn't look bad at all. Fast, well armored, well armed, by treaty standards anyway. Not one of the pre-treaty monstrosities, which they do have at least 4 of in service. They have Henry IV and Magenta of the Condorcet class, 31,400 tons, 23 knots, 9 14-inch guns and 3 triple turrets, 22 6-inch, 6 4-inch, and a 13.5-inch belt. These are not super fast, but fast enough. Well armed, I mean, in a way nobody could have matched lately with the 9 14-inch guns. Weird secondaries, but heavy. And very well armored. Depends what the deck is like, of course, but very well armored on paper. So this is a bit of a menace of a battleship duo, actually, with heavy gun armament and very heavy armor. Quite nice, actually. Quite nice. I mean, no weird turret layout with the midships thing, don't get me wrong, but quite nice nonetheless. They followed that with Charlemagne, 32,600 tons, 23 knots, 9 14-inch guns and 3 triple turrets, 16 6-inch and a 14-inch belt. This is very similar, but 1,200 tons heavier. Loses some secondaries. And gains another half-inch of belt armor. I don't feel like half an inch of belt armor sufficiently accounts for a 1,200 ton increase plus losing 6-inch guns, so probably gains a half inch of deck at least as well. Which, if that's the case, will overall make this an even more formidable battleship and just really well armored as well as well armed. So well done to the French on that. And just before the treaty, they got into something even more powerful. The 36,900 ton France. 25 knots, 11 14-inch guns in 1 triple and 4 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 3 6 3-inch, and a 13.5-inch belt. This thing is a titan. I mean, this is a monstrosity. For the last decade, this thing has been nigh unstoppable by just anything in the world. Very well armored, assuming her deck is pretty good also. Extremely well armed by the standards of anything around. Easily, this thing can easily crush any Treaty Max battleship. And there's hardly any pre-treaty battleships around that match her either. This is very, very nice. Objectively more powerful than my Rodney class, which are my top battleships by a pretty considerable margin. Of course, they only have 1 of her, but still. Then they did build a Treaty Max class, the Republique, Galois, and Bouvet in the mid to late 20s. These are 24,200 tons, 24 knots, 10 12-inch guns in 2 twin, 2 triple turrets, 14 5-inch, 4 4-inch, and 11-inch belt. Fast enough, well armed enough, not super well armored, though I'm assuming there's a lot going into the deck, but not bad at all. Just nothing exceptional. Most of the Treaty Max battleships do actually look pretty similar to each other, I think. Some of them are better than others. I think the US ones are pretty scary, actually, but these are not bad at all. And then most recently, they've built a new Treaty Max class, Gascon, and her sister Bretagne will be finished soon. 23,900 tons, 26 knots, 8 12s in 4 twin turrets, 14 5-inch, 4 3-inch, and an 11-inch belt. Same armor. They've actually sacrificed a twin turret. Well, they haven't sacrificed a twin turret, but they've sacrificed the extra gun barrels on 2 of the turrets in order to get 2 more knots of speed. I don't really think that's worth it, but maybe. Yeah. The treaty does kind of incentivize. Nobody really fully did it, but the treaty kind of incentivizes combined, fast battleships instead of separate battleships, battlecruisers, and this is fulfilling that role a little bit more. But it's still not great armor or armament, even for the Treaty Max limits. It's just fast. So I'm not in love with it. Okay, and then that will bring us to the big 3. Germany have the most powerful battle line in the world, consisting of 11 battleships amounting to 351,000 tons, though they only have 1 battle cruiser for 29,000 tons. That battle cruiser is a pre-treaty cruiser, but not a special one. Rune, 28,900 tons, 28 knots, 11 11-inch guns in 1 triple turret and 4 twin using cross-stack firing, 14 6-inch and 12 3-inch guns and an 11-inch belt. Look, she's still fast enough. She's still quite well armored for a battlecruiser. Her armament was not good when she was built. The treaty system has kind of saved it from becoming hopelessly bad, but it's still kind of bad even post-treaty system. There's plenty of battlecruisers out there with 11 12-inch guns, or similar, and not using cross-deck firing, because at plenty of angles, your broadside will really be 9 11-inch guns. I don't understand the 1920 era cross-deck firing that some countries were still using, other than that maybe they were weirdly behind on tech. And it's not, well, for being their only battlecruiser, she's just not that formidable. Any of my battlecruisers could probably fight and win against this battlecruiser. Even the older 2, certainly the newer 3 could. So I'm not too convinced on Rune. On the other hand, their battleships, well, they have saved, I think, a larger proportion of their well, let's put it this way. They literally have not built a treaty battle. They have not built any treaty capital ships. I think they've just been building up their, I don't know what they've been building up, to be honest. Because if they built no treaty capital ships, then really in the last 7 years, they haven't built a whole lot of heavy cruisers and light cruisers. They've built a lot of nice destroyers, maybe that's part of it, and light carriers and such. Oh no, now I'm looking at France. Oh yeah, they've built a lot of light carriers, and they've built a lot of nice destroyers, and a pretty decent number of cruisers. I guess that's what they've been focusing on, because they are using an all pre-treaty battleship lineup. And you know what? It's all the better for it, because we'll get to the USA and what they've screwed up in a minute, but Germany has what the USA's fleet could have been if they hadn't ruined it just in the last couple of years. Because all 11 of these battleships are in gross violation of the naval treaty, if not for being grandfathered in. We have SMS Kaiser, 29,300 tons, 22 knots, 8 14-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, and a 13.5-inch belt. She's not fast, but fast enough. She's well armed, better than any treaty battleship, and she's really quite well armored as well. Maybe her deck is lacking, it's hard to say, compared to the most modern ships, but I doubt it's that bad. And overall, fast enough, well armed, very well armored. This ship is already a match for my best battleships, probably. Like, this is very close to the Rodneys, which we'll get to in a minute. But she's the least out of the German battleships. We then have Lothringen, Nassau, and Aegir. 31,500 tons, 21 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 2 twin, 2 triple turrets, 14 6-inch, 2 3-inch, and a 14-inch belt. Not fast, but fast enough, and very well armed, and very well armored. I mean, this is. I wish I had 3 Lothringens. These are. Well, I still don't love the 6-inch secondary thing the AI does. Because my understanding is that 6-inch do better against cruisers, yes, than smaller guns, but are not as useful against destroyers. Like, there's a significant accuracy drop off against destroyers between 5 and 6-inch. Is my current understanding of game mechanics, at least. Maybe they changed it at some point. But in any case, the 10 14-inch guns, the 14-inch belt, basically unstoppable. This is one of the most powerful battleships in the world, if not for the fact that Germany has even more powerful battleships. They have Wurth, 31,000 tons, 21 knots, 12 14-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, 14 4-inch, 4 3-inch, and a 12.5-inch belt. A little less well armored, but still quite well armored, and even more, an enormous amount of firepower. Really quite impressive. This is, again, just one of the most powerful battleships in the world, and it doesn't have any obvious flaws to me. The latest battleships are faster, but that's about it. Then Schlesien and Hanover from 1919-20. 32,000 tons, 22 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, 16 6-inch, 2 4-inch, and a 12-inch belt. This one's a little weirder in that it has a 5th turret midships rather than having, like, triples. But a little faster. Still well armored. Not as hugely, but well armored. Again, there's nothing really wrong with this ship, and it's just very, very powerful overall. Then we have Hessen, 32,700 tons, 23 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, 16 6-inch, 2 4-inch, and a 12-inch belt. Basically equal to the Schlesiens, except 700 tons heavier and 1 knot faster, which I'm assuming is the main upgrade. Then Kronprinz, 35,400 tons, 24 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 2 twin, 2 triple turrets, 16 6-inch, 2 3-inch, and a 14.5-inch belt. Extraordinarily well armored, assuming the deck matches, but I assume it probably does. So extremely well armored, very powerfully armed, considering the limits of the treaty to all battleships since. This... I'd have to look around. Can't remember everything, but... she's competing with France, perhaps? Yeah, very close with the likes of France. Better than Petropavlovsk. Better than this, honestly. Competing with this, but better. No, this has no armor. It's between Kronprinz and France for most powerful battleship in the world, I think. Except where the French have a total of, like, 4 of these heavy battleships, the Germans have 11 that are not that much worse than Kronprinz. So it's quite exceptional, yeah. And then finally, Zaringen and Prince Regent Leutpold, which are a little smaller, 32,400 tons, 20 knots, 9 14-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, 16 5-inch, 4 3-inch, and a 15-inch belt. And these are really getting a little slow. I don't like to see battleships drop below 21 knots at this point. Really new ones should probably make 24 or 27, but certainly not to drop below 21. The armament is a little less than some of them that have 10 14-inch guns as well. So I think on the Zaringens, they've maybe slightly overdone it in the quest for armor. That said, ludicrously well armored, of course. A little slower, still very well armed, objectively, compared to most any modern battleship, any treaty battleship, and just ludicrously well armored. So the Zodengans aren't exactly bad either. Weird layout though, so I don't love them as much as some of the others. But so yeah, the Germans have a complete lineup of 11 battleships that are just like every one of the 11 is among the top 20 to 25 battleships in the world, probably, which is ridiculous. They've got a hell of a battle line, basically. Now, we have 10 battleships amounting to 267,000 tons and 5 battle cruisers amounting to 145,000 tons in service. Of the battle cruisers, we have the two 20-year-old Indomitables, HMS Inflexible and Inconstant, 28,100 tons, 27 knots, 8 12-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 12 5-inch, 10 3-inch, 11-inch belt, 2.5-inch deck. Honestly, for being 20 years old, they haven't aged that badly. The treaty definitely helped them out in that regard. They are no longer fast by battlecruiser standards, but they're not horrific yet either. Their armament would have really aged out by now, and the non-super firing front turret is bow turret is still weird, but as it is, it's actually pretty much just fine still, and their armor is still pretty solid. The latest battlecruisers definitely have more deck, but these really still aren't that bad. If not for the treaty limitations of the last 10 years, they would have been quite a bit worse, but as it is, they're still holding up acceptably, honestly. And then we have HMS New Zealand, Australia, and Lion. Only marginally larger, 29,800 tons, 27 knots, 8 14-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 25-inch, 12-inch belt, and 3-inch deck. They get a lot out of being marginally larger. A 14-inch gun main battery, all 5-inch secondary battery, better belt and deck. These are not fast for modern battle cruisers, but they're fast enough, and they are very well armed and very well armored. Some of the latest battle cruisers probably have more deck, but overall still very well armored, very well armed. These are pretty much a match for almost any of the battle cruisers out there, except possibly there are a few, not the Germans, but the French. Well, Turenne has more guns, but not more armor, so I would probably say we're at least even with her. Same with Sinop here, actually. The USA has, we'll get to them, but the USA has a couple of very formidable battle cruisers. Oh, and then the Japanese, this battle cruiser could beat them, yes, because of the 15-inch guns. But this is about the only battle cruiser in the world that I think is clearly better. Yeah. I would say the Japanese Tokachi and possibly the American Franklin are the only battle cruisers in the world that are clearly better than my New Zealand class still. Obviously, they were finished shortly before the treaty. Lion actually barely squeaked in before the treaty. And so they have pretty much the advantages of being some of the last post-treaty, pre-treaty battle cruisers. Then for battleships, well, Renown is in a museum ship now. We effectively have 10. We have HMS Vengeance and Russell, which are 20 years old, but 27,600 tons, 21 knots, 9 12-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, 16 5-inch, 8 3-inch, 13-inch belt, and 2.5-inch deck. Their speed is not anything great anymore, but it's still alright. Their armament would have been quite bad, but the treaty has kind of saved them, and in all reality, their armament is still alright. Not anything exceptional, but it's pretty much equal to most of the Treaty Max battleships, roughly. And their armor is still pretty good as well. Deck is going to be lacking now, but the belt's alright. And they weren't built with a super thin deck or anything, so they're the oldest and weakest of our battleships, yeah, but they're not terrible yet by any means. Then we have, from 6 years later, HMS Rodney, Majestic, Camperdown, and Howe. These are no longer our most modern battleships. They are, in most ways, probably our most powerful. 28,000 tons, 21 knots, 8 14-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 25-inch and 16 3-inch, 13-inch belt, 3-inch deck. Not super fast anymore, but quite well armed. There are a few better armed battleships out there, such as pretty much the entire German battle line, but we're at least competitive with the likes of that in terms of both armament and armor. Frankly, the Rodney class displaces less than the entire German battle line, so it's not surprising they're a little bit behind. But they're built along very similar lines and could give most any of them a run for their money at least, which makes them better than almost any Treaty Max battleship in terms of firepower and armor. Now, the latest are HMS Collingwood, Benbow, Royal Sovereign, and Empress of India. These are Treaty Max battleships built to replace the Renowns. 25,000 tons even, 24 knot speed, 9 12-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, all forward, 25-inch, 13-inch belt, and 3.5-inch deck. These are fast. They're not the fastest battleships around, but they're faster than any previous battleships, and definitely more than fast enough. They have a pretty good armament for a treaty battleship, and pretty excellent armor for a treaty battleship. They're actually better armored than the Rodneys with the thicker deck, and faster than the Rodneys. They just have less gun power due to the necessary reduction to 12-inch instead of 14-inch. It is interesting. I believe 13-inch was the limit. Nobody built a 13-inch treaty battleship, which I stuck with 12-inch because I don't have good 13-inch guns. We can look at the quality. I have like -2 13-inch guns, whereas we have quality 1 12-inch guns. But I'm surprised none of the AI went with 13-inch guns. Apparently not, though. As it is, these are our treaty battleships at present, and they are, yeah, pretty nice, I would say. They're probably comparable to the Rodneys in fighting power. They're going to have less hitting power, but marginally better armor, and they are faster, so they're not too much worse. Obviously, post-treaty, some much larger new battleship classes with 15 and 16-inch guns are going to be laid down very quickly, and we're definitely going to have to get in on that. I believe my first priority was some destroyers and carriers, but then battleships are definitely going to have to come, because they're not quite obsolete just yet. And then finally, the United States. 8 battleships amounting to 242,000 tons, counting the one they're building, and 5 battle cruisers amounting to 178,000 tons, which puts them just short of Italy on total tonnage and significantly heavier on average tonnage. Now, they are very fortunate in that they managed to finish 5 battleships just in the year or two before the treaty, which is pretty priceless for them, really, yeah. So they have USS Franklin, which is probably the king of them, 36,000 tons, 28 knots, 8 15-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 6 4-inch, and an 11-inch belt. More than fast enough for a battlecruiser. 15-inch guns, essentially an unbeatable armament. To be fair, my New Zealands are not that badly outgunned with 14-inch against 15-inch, but they're definitely outgunned, just objectively. And they've got an 11-inch belt, which isn't spectacular, but is quite good for a battleship still. You know, I do actually think the Tokachi is a little bit better, yeah. But it's not a huge difference. I think Tokachi takes the prize for best battlecruiser in the world, though, thanks to slightly thicker belt armor. If there's a big difference in deck in Franklin's favor, that would change things, but I doubt there is, based on the displacements. So anyway, then we have Kearsarge, 34,900 tons, 30 knots, 9 14-inch guns in 1 triple and 3 twin turrets, 16 6-inch, 6 3-inch, and a 9-inch belt. Very fast, still, more heavily armored than any Treaty Max battlecruiser, and just very heavily armed in general. But armor letting Kearsarge down a little. I assume she has quite a bit of deck, but the belt is pretty thin again for a modern battlecruiser. And then USS Princeton and Ticonderoga. These are the biggest capital ships in the American fleet. 36,700 tons, 29 knots, 7 15-inch guns in 1 triple and 2 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 6 3-inch, and a 10.5-inch belt. I am not sure why these displace more than Franklin. Well, except they're not faster, but that's it. They have half an inch less of belt armor. They have 1 less gun turret. Well, 1 less turret and 1 less barrel. And the only thing they've gained is they're not faster. They might, maybe, theoretically have more deck armor as well. Possibly. But I'm guessing it's just the speed, because speed costs a lot of displacement at this kind of pushing the limits speed. So the Princetons are very fast, yes. Well, they're not that very fast anymore, though. Speed has come on in the last 10 years. The latest battlecruisers, treaty battlecruisers, are doing 30, 32 knots, so they're not that exceptionally fast anymore. They are still very well armed, because 15-inch guns just can't be matched. They're not that well armored. They're well armored, I would say, but not super well armored, you know. It's acceptable, but not great. I would rather have Franklin than a Princeton, honestly. So I don't think they improved the design there. And then the last finished just before the treaty, USS Essex, 33,700 tons, 30 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 2 twin and 2 triple turrets, 16 5-inch and 6 3-inch with a 9-inch belt. Very fast, quite well armed still, although a bit of a weird layout with the midships turret. Under-armored for a modern battlecruiser, though. So overall, the US battlecruiser force is quite nice, but a lot of their ships are kind of on the... Oh, God. Good thing we're almost done. Hiccuping now. A lot of them are quite on the low end in terms of armor. Even if they're quite nice in terms of speed and armament. So then we come to the battleships, and they... It is a very good thing for us, right as we... Just before we got into this war, literally in the last year or two of game time, the US honestly had a beautiful battle line that looked a lot like Germany's, or had a lot of these 3 things that we see here now at the top, but they scrapped piles of them in the last couple of years in order to build, probably in order to commission these 4 Treaty Max battleships here. But what a waste that's been for them. Because those were all 14-inch battleships, and they're just all irreplaceable, so I consider it pretty much a disaster on their part, considering most of them were really not that old. So what they've left themselves with, USS Colorado in Connecticut, 34,500 tons, 23 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 2 twin and 2 triple turrets, 22 6-inch, 4 3-inch, and a 12.5-inch belt. Pretty decently fast, very well armed, quite well armored. Just a good all-round battleship here for 1920 or so. No complaint. I mean, overall, pretty much a match or superior to my Rodney class, right? 2 knots faster, slightly less armored, but 2 extra guns as well, so a close peer rival to the Rodney class. And then the slightly lighter USS South Carolina, 30,000 tons, 24 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 2 twin and 2 triple turrets, 16 5-inch, 4 3-inch, and a 13-inch belt. I'm not actually sure what they sacrificed to save 4,500 tons here, because she seems to be a knot faster with the same armament and half an inch more of belt armor. So I don't know how they got a knot and half an inch of belt armor while also being 4,500 tons lighter. But somehow they did. Maybe she's short-ranged or something ridiculous like that. But South Carolina is very similar otherwise, and another close peer rival with the likes of my Rodneys. Unfortunately for them, while they had a whole lot of those until recently, they've now replaced them all with Treaty Max battleships. They have USS Michigan and New Mexico. These are 23,400 tons, 24 knots, 8 12-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 14 5-inch, 6 4-inch, and a 13.5-inch belt. These are fast. They're very well armored. They're reasonably armed. Overall, they're pretty much a match for my Collingwoods. Same speed, 1 less gun turret, or one less gun barrel, but half an inch more of belt armor. I think I would probably bet on my Collingwoods overall, considering underlying factors, but they're pretty close to the Michigans here. And then more recently, they've built, well, USS Minnesota, North Carolina, and Oregon, with Rhode Island still building, which are 24,100 tons, 27 knots, 8 12-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 14 4-inch, 4 3-inch, and an 11-inch belt. In my opinion, these are just worse. It depends partially on what they've done with the deck, but same armament, right? 4 twin 12-inch turrets. Compared to the Michigans, they've basically trimmed 2.5 inches off the belt in order to get 3 knots of speed. I don't know that it's worth it. I don't personally think it's worth it, to be honest. But maybe it is. Objectively, I don't know. It's a fast battleship now, of course, a proper fast battleship design. But the armor is now a little lacking for a modern battleship, to be honest. It kind of depends what the deck is, but I doubt it can be higher, because knots of speed cost a lot of weight, so I doubt it can have more deck than the Michigans from just a couple years prior. Which means overall, I would rather fight a Minnesota than a Michigan, I think. The Minnesotas are more capable of keeping up with cruisers or carriers and so on, so they might have more longevity, but in terms of battling power, I'm not too convinced. And I certainly wouldn't take either of them over the piles of these that they just decommissioned, or like slightly worse than these battleships. In any case, that's where the US is at. That's where everybody's at, in fact. So that is the World's Fighting Ships 1930. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you all have a nice day. And tune in to see how the war with the USA goes. This is Sea Lord Janda, signing off.